The paradox of choice. It's a strange concept, isn't it? The idea that having more options, something we usually think of as a good thing, can actually make us less satisfied, more anxious, and ultimately less happy. It runs counter to what we assume about freedom and decision-making. We believe that the more choices we have, the more control we have over our lives. More control should mean better outcomes. But research suggests otherwise. This idea was popularized by psychologist Barry Schwartz in his book, The Paradox of Choice: Why More is Less. Schwartz argues that while having some choice is undoubtedly beneficial, an overabundance of choices can paralyze decision-making and reduce satisfaction with the choices we do make. Think about something as simple as buying a jar of jam. In one experiment, researchers set up a tasting booth in a grocery store. Sometimes they offered 6 flavors of jam to sample, and other times they offered 24. You might assume that the table with more flavors would attract more customers and lead to more purchases. But the opposite happened. While more people stopped at the larger display, they were far less likely to actually buy anything. In contrast, the smaller selection led to higher sales. Too many options led to indecision. This study, conducted by Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper, is one of the most famous pieces of research on the paradox of choice. Why does this happen? One reason is decision paralysis. When faced with too many options, our brains struggle to process the differences and weigh the pros and cons of each. Instead of making a decision, we freeze, we hesitate, and often, we walk away without choosing anything at all. Another reason is anticipated regret. The more options we have, the more we fear making the wrong choice. If we only have 2 or 3 options, it's easier to compare them and feel confident in our decision. But if we have 50, there's always a lingering doubt that we might have overlooked the best one. We start imagining alternative realities where a different choice could have led to a better outcome. This effect is amplified in high-stakes decisions, like choosing a college, a career path, or even a life partner. The more possibilities we see, the more we question whether we've made the right call. Did we pick the best school, or just a good school? Did we choose the right job, or is there something better out there? The fear of missing out on a perfect choice can make us less satisfied with the choices we do make, even if they're objectively great. Consider online dating. Dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge have given people access to an unprecedented number of potential partners. On the surface, this seems like a fantastic improvement over traditional dating. More options should mean a better chance of finding the ideal match. But studies have shown that too many choices actually make people less likely to commit. The endless scroll of potential partners creates the illusion that there's always someone better, just one swipe away. This leads to a kind of perfectionism that makes real-world relationships feel less satisfying, because they can never live up to the possibility of something better. Another real-world example is streaming services. Think about how often you've sat down to watch something on Netflix, only to spend 20 minutes scrolling through endless choices before giving up and watching something you've already seen. The overwhelming number of options leads to indecision. And even when we do pick something, we might not fully enjoy it. Because in the back of our minds, we're wondering if we should have chosen something else. Barry Schwartz makes an interesting distinction between 2 types of people: maximizers and satisficers. Maximizers are people who need to find the absolute best option in every situation. They analyze every detail, compare every possible alternative, and won't settle until they're sure they've made the perfect choice. Satisficers, on the other hand, look for an option that meets their needs and stop searching once they find something that's good enough. Who do you think is happier? Surprisingly, it's the satisficers. Maximizers, despite putting in more effort to find the best option, often end up less satisfied. Why? Because they always wonder if they could have done better. Satisficers, on the other hand, are more content because they focus on what works rather than what's perfect. This paradox plays out in many areas of modern life, from choosing a restaurant to planning a vacation to deciding what clothes to wear. The explosion of choices in the digital age. Online shopping, endless product reviews, comparison websites, has only amplified the problem. Instead of feeling empowered, we often feel exhausted. So what's the solution? One approach is to set limits. When making a decision, give yourself a fixed number of options to consider, rather than trying to explore every possibility. Another strategy is to embrace satisficing. Train yourself to recognize when a choice is good enough, instead of obsessing over making the perfect decision. And finally, practice gratitude. Instead of focusing on what you could have chosen, focus on appreciating what you did choose. At its core, the paradox of choice reveals an important truth. Freedom isn't just about having more options. It's about knowing when to stop searching and start enjoying what we have. Before you discover new paradoxes and sleep like a baby, please like, subscribe our channel Restwise and share your favorite paradox in the comments. Now, get comfy, take a deep breath, and let these paradoxes guide you into a peaceful sleep. The paradox of effort is the strange idea that while we often seek to avoid effort, believing that less work will make us happier, the reality is that effort itself is what gives meaning and satisfaction to our achievements. The more we invest in something, the more we tend to value it, even if that effort was difficult or unpleasant at the time. One of the clearest examples of this paradox is what psychologists call the IKEA effect. Researchers Michael Norton, Daniel Mocon, and Dan Ariely found that people place disproportionately high value on things they've built themselves, even when the end result isn't particularly great. If you've ever assembled a piece of IKEA furniture, you know the frustration that comes with it, missing screws, vague instructions, the existential crisis of realizing you put the shelf in backward. And yet, once the piece is finished, you feel an immense sense of pride. It's yours because you worked for it. The same object, if pre-assembled and delivered to your door, wouldn't carry the same sense of attachment. This effect extends far beyond furniture. It applies to anything we create, build, or struggle for, whether it's a home, cooked meal, a workout routine, or a project at work. We value things more when we've invested effort into them. Ironically, if we had the option to eliminate that effort, we might take it, thinking it would make life easier. But by doing so, we'd strip away the very thing that makes the experience meaningful. Another study that illustrates this paradox comes from Harvard psychologist Richard Hackman, who studied motivation in the workplace. He found that people are more engaged and satisfied in jobs that challenge them and require effort. If a job is too easy, it quickly becomes unfulfilling, even if it's comfortable. Many people fantasize about having an easy job where they don't have to work hard. But in reality, the most meaningful work is often the hardest. This is why people who retire early sometimes find themselves feeling lost. Without something to strive for, life can feel directionless. A similar effect can be seen in physical fitness. Exercise is, by definition, effortful. If we could be in perfect shape without ever stepping foot in a gym, many of us might be tempted to take that shortcut. But people who engage in challenging workouts, push through discomfort, and see progress over time report a deep sense of satisfaction. The effort itself becomes part of the reward. This paradox also plays out in education, learning something new. Whether it's a language, a musical instrument, or a difficult mathematical concept, requires struggle. It's tempting to wish that knowledge could be instantly uploaded into our brains without effort. But studies on the generation effect suggest that the harder we work to learn something, the better we remember and understand it. Struggle enhances retention. The very act of effortfully grappling with an idea makes it stick in our minds. One of the most extreme examples of the paradox of effort is seen in endurance challenges. Think about marathon runners, mountain climbers, or anyone who willingly puts themselves through extreme physical and mental exertion. From an outsider's perspective, it might seem absurd. Why would someone voluntarily push their body to exhaustion, endure pain, and risk failure? And yet, those who complete such challenges often describe them as some of the most meaningful experiences of their lives. The joy comes because of the difficulty, not in spite of it. The paradox of effort helps explain why instant gratification often leads to dissatisfaction. If something is too easy, we don't value it. We see this in the way people treat money they win versus money they earn. Studies show that lottery winners often spend their winnings recklessly and experience lower levels of long-term happiness than people who worked hard to earn their wealth. When money comes too easily, it loses its meaning. But money earned through effort carries a sense of pride and responsibility. So, what does this mean for us? It suggests that rather than avoiding effort, we should embrace it. Instead of seeking shortcuts, we should recognize that the struggle itself is part of what makes life fulfilling. Whether it's in our work, our relationships, our hobbies, or our personal growth, effort is not something to be minimized. It's something to be valued. At its core, the paradox of effort reveals an important truth. The things that require the most work are often the things that bring us the greatest satisfaction. The effort is the reward. Paradox of change. The paradox of change is the idea that the more we desperately try to change something about ourselves or our lives, the harder it becomes to actually change. At the same time, real transformation often happens when we stop resisting, accept where we are, and allow change to happen naturally. In other words, the more we push for change, the more we may get stuck. But when we let go of that rigid need for control, change starts to unfold on its own. This paradox is at the heart of many personal struggles, from habits and self-improvement to emotional healing and societal change. Take the example of happiness. Studies have shown that people who actively chase happiness, who treat it as a goal to be achieved, often end up feeling more dissatisfied. The harder they try to make themselves happy, the more happiness seems to slip away. This phenomenon is known as the happiness trap, and research by psychologists like Iris Morse has demonstrated that the more people place value on being happy, the more they tend to feel disappointed and anxious when they fall short. Ironically, the people who report the greatest life satisfaction aren't necessarily the ones chasing happiness. They're the ones who focus on living meaningfully, building relationships, and engaging in fulfilling activities. Happiness, then, becomes a byproduct rather than a direct goal. This paradox applies to personal change as well. Consider someone who desperately wants to break a bad habit, say, overeating, smoking, or procrastinating. The more they tell themselves, I have to stop this, I need to change now, the more pressure they create. That pressure often leads to frustration, guilt, and eventually giving up. Behavioral science suggests that sustainable change comes not from self-punishment or forcing oneself to be different, but from small, consistent shifts in mindset and behavior. The self-determination theory, proposed by psychologists Edward Deci and Richard Ryan, suggests that change is most effective when it's driven by intrinsic motivation rather than external pressure. In other words, people change when they genuinely want to, not when they feel they have to. A powerful real-world example of the paradox of change can be seen in mental health. Take anxiety, for instance. When people suffer from anxiety, their natural reaction is to try to fight it, suppress it, or make it go away as quickly as possible. But psychologists have found that this approach often backfires. The more we try to get rid of anxiety, the stronger it becomes. This is because resistance fuels the problem. The more we tell ourselves, I shouldn't feel this way, the more we actually focus on and amplify the feeling. This is the foundation of acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, which suggests that real change comes when we stop fighting negative emotions and instead acknowledge them, accept them, and choose to act in alignment with our values. regardless of discomfort. The same paradox plays out in relationships. Imagine someone who desperately wants to be liked, to find love, or to be accepted by others. If they try too hard, constantly seeking validation, overanalyzing every interaction, or changing themselves to fit in, they often come across as inauthentic, and the connection they crave becomes even more elusive. But when they relax, stop trying to force approval, and focus on being themselves, relationships tend to develop naturally. This idea also applies to large-scale societal change. Movements that seek rapid, forced transformation often face resistance, not necessarily because people oppose the change itself, but because they resist being pushed into it. History shows that sustainable change happens when new ideas are introduced gradually, when people internalize them over time, rather than when they are imposed abruptly. So, how do we work with this paradox? The key is learning to balance effort and acceptance. This doesn't mean giving up on change. It means approaching it differently. Instead of forcing change through sheer willpower, we can create conditions that allow change to unfold. This means focusing on small, consistent actions rather than dramatic overhauls. It means being patient with ourselves rather than demanding instant transformation. It means shifting our mindset from "I must change now" to "I am growing, step by step." At its core, the paradox of change reminds us that transformation doesn't happen through force. It happens when we stop resisting where we are, accept the process, and allow change to emerge naturally. The more we let go of the desperate need to change, the more change actually happens. Paradox of happiness. The paradox of happiness is the idea that the more we actively pursue happiness as a goal, the harder it becomes to achieve. The more we tell ourselves, "I need to be happy," the more we scrutinize our emotional state, and the more we notice when we fall short. This relentless pursuit often leads to frustration, anxiety, and even unhappiness. Strangely, happiness tends to emerge most when we stop chasing it directly and instead focus on meaningful experiences, relationships, and activities. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. Shouldn't working toward happiness make us happier? After all, we set goals for success, health, and relationships. Why wouldn't the same logic apply to happiness? But psychological research suggests that happiness, unlike material goals, doesn't work that way. One of the most well-known studies on this paradox was conducted by psychologist Iris Mars. Her research found that people who placed a high emphasis on achieving happiness often felt more lonely, anxious, and dissatisfied. The problem is that when we treat happiness as a measurable goal, we start constantly evaluating whether we've reached it. And each time we feel like we haven't, we become even more aware of our unhappiness. It's a feedback loop that makes happiness feel like it's always just out of reach. A common example of this paradox is seen in the way we approach pleasure. Many people assume that indulging in things that bring immediate enjoyment, like entertainment, luxury, or relaxation, will naturally lead to happiness. And while these things do provide short-term pleasure, studies on hedonic adaptation show that we quickly get used to them. The first time you buy an expensive gadget, a dream car, or go on an extravagant vacation, it might feel amazing. But over time, the excitement fades, and we find ourselves back at our baseline level of happiness. This leads to the constant cycle of "if I just had this one more thing, then I'd be happy." But when we get that thing, we adapt again, and happiness remains just beyond our grasp. Another way this paradox plays out is in our attempts to avoid negative emotions. Many people believe that to be happy, they need to eliminate sadness, anxiety, or discomfort from their lives. But research suggests that trying too hard to suppress negative emotions actually makes them stronger. This is known as ironic process theory, developed by psychologist Daniel Wegner. The more we try not to feel something, the more our brain fixates on it. If you've ever told yourself, "I shouldn't be sad, I need to be happy right now," you've probably noticed that it only makes you more frustrated with your own emotions. True happiness doesn't come from avoiding sadness. It comes from accepting it as part of the human experience. The paradox of happiness also appears in social relationships. Imagine someone who desperately wants to be loved and admired. If they obsess over making people like them, overanalyze social interactions, or constantly seek validation, they often push others away. But when they relax and focus on being present rather than proving themselves, relationships form naturally. The same applies to romantic relationships. People who are constantly searching for the perfect partner often find themselves disappointed. But those who focus on living a fulfilling life and being their best selves often attract meaningful connections effortlessly. So, if chasing happiness directly doesn't work, what does? The answer lies in shifting our focus from pursuing happiness to creating the conditions in which happiness can arise. Studies in positive psychology suggest that happiness is more of a byproduct than a goal. It tends to emerge when we engage in meaningful work, build strong relationships, practice gratitude, and find purpose in something beyond ourselves. Instead of constantly asking, "Am I happy right now?" we might ask, "Am I engaged? Am I growing? Am I contributing to something meaningful?" This is why people who focus on activities that create meaning, like helping others, pursuing passions, or developing skills, often report higher levels of long-term happiness than those who simply chase pleasurable experiences. One study by Harvard researchers in the Harvard Study of Adult Development, which followed participants for over 80 years, found that the greatest predictor of long-term happiness wasn't wealth, fame, or career success. It was the quality of a person's relationships. Deep connections, not a direct pursuit of happiness, were what led to a fulfilling life. Another example of this paradox is seen in mindfulness and meditation. Many people turn to these practices in the hopes of achieving happiness. But ironically, mindfulness teaches the opposite. Rather than chasing happiness, it encourages people to simply be present, to observe their thoughts and emotions without judgment. And it's precisely this shift in perspective, letting go of the need to be happy, that often leads to a greater sense of peace and contentment. Ultimately, the paradox of happiness teaches us that the more we try to control happiness, the more elusive it becomes. Instead of treating happiness as a goal to be reached, we can see it as something that arises when we live with intention, curiosity, and engagement. Happiness is not found in a single moment of achievement, but in the ongoing process of living fully. When we stop chasing it and start focusing on the things that truly matter, happiness often finds us when we least expect it. The paradox of self-knowledge is the strange reality that while we often believe that knowing ourselves deeply will bring clarity and confidence, the more we examine who we are, the more complex, uncertain, and elusive our true selves become. Instead of achieving a definitive understanding of ourselves, we uncover layers of contradictions, biases, and blind spots that make self-knowledge an ever-moving target. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. We assume that introspection, the process of reflecting on our thoughts, feelings, and motivations, should bring us closer to self-awareness. After all, if anyone should understand us, it should be ourselves. But psychological research suggests that introspection can sometimes lead to less accurate self-knowledge, not more. One of the main reasons for this is what psychologists call the introspection illusion. We tend to believe that our self-reflections provide an unbiased, objective view of who we are, but in reality, our minds are full of cognitive biases. We construct narratives about ourselves that make sense of our past actions and beliefs. But these narratives aren't always truthful. They are often shaped by what we want to believe rather than what is actually true. For example, in one study by psychologists Timothy Wilson and Richard Nisbett, participants were asked to choose between different pairs of identical stockings. When asked why they chose a particular pair, they came up with logical, sounding explanations like texture or quality, even though all the stockings were exactly the same. This study revealed that people often don't have direct access to the real reasons behind their choices. Instead, they generate explanations after the fact, without realizing they are doing so. If this happens with something as simple as choosing stockings, imagine how often it happens in more complex areas of our lives. Why we fall in love, why we choose certain careers, why we hold certain beliefs. Another challenge to self-knowledge is the Dunning-Kruger effect, named after researchers David Dunning and Justin Kruger. This cognitive bias shows that people who are least competent in a skill or area of knowledge often overestimate their abilities, while those who are highly skilled tend to underestimate themselves. In other words, people who lack self-awareness tend to believe they understand themselves more than they actually do. Meanwhile, those who question themselves more deeply may actually have a better grasp of reality, but they also experience more self-doubt. This paradox suggests that true self-knowledge requires a kind of humility, the recognition that we might not know ourselves as well as we think. Another reason why self-knowledge is so elusive is that our identities are not fixed. We like to think of ourselves as having a stable, core personality, but in reality, our sense of self changes based on our experiences, social environments, and even our moods. Consider how you might describe yourself in different situations. The way you behave with friends might be completely different from how you behave at work or in your family. Are all of those versions of you equally true? Is one of them more real than the others? This is the paradox. Searching for a singular, unchanging self might be an impossible task, because who we are is constantly evolving. Even memory, something we rely on heavily for self-understanding, is unreliable. Research by psychologist Elizabeth Loftus has shown that memories are not static recordings of the past, but are reconstructed every time we recall them. This means that the stories we tell ourselves about our past selves may not be entirely accurate. If our own memories are flawed, how can we claim to truly know who we are? This paradox also appears in the concept of free will. Many of us believe we make conscious choices based on our inner desires and rational thought, but studies in neuroscience suggest that decisions are often made at an unconscious level before we even become aware of them. Research by Benjamin Libet, for instance, found that brain activity related to making a choice begins before a person is consciously aware of making the decision. If our choices are influenced by factors we don't even have access to, how much control do we really have over shaping who we are? So, what do we do with this paradox? If true self-knowledge is so difficult to attain, does that mean we should stop trying to understand ourselves? Not necessarily. Instead of seeking a single, definitive answer to who we are, we might benefit from accepting that self-knowledge is an ongoing process rather than a final destination. We can remain open to change, willing to question our assumptions about ourselves and curious about the ways we might evolve. Another important shift is to balance introspection with external feedback. Studies have shown that while we may struggle to see ourselves clearly, other people can often predict our behaviors and tendencies better than we can. Instead of relying solely on self-reflection, we can seek input from trusted friends, mentors, or therapists who can provide perspectives we might be blind to. Ultimately, the paradox of self-knowledge reminds us that the more we try to pin down a single, unchanging self, the more we realize that the self is fluid, shifting, and shaped by forces beyond our full understanding. The key may not be to solve the paradox, but to embrace it, to approach ourselves with curiosity, flexibility, and a willingness to accept that we are always a work in progress. Paradox of control. The paradox of control is the idea that the more we try to exert control over our lives, the more we realize how little control we actually have. While we assume that having control leads to security, stability, and success, an excessive need for control often leads to stress, frustration, and even a loss of the very control we seek. On the other hand, when we learn to let go, accepting uncertainty and focusing on what we can influence. We often find a deeper sense of peace, adaptability, and even more control over our outcomes. At first glance, this seems counterintuitive. After all, control is something we value highly. We make plans, set goals, and structure our lives around the idea that we are in charge of our future. But psychological and philosophical studies suggest that too much focus on control can backfire. The harder we grip, the more things slip through our fingers. A great example of this paradox can be found in sports and performance psychology. Athletes who try to force the perfect shot, the perfect swing, or the perfect race often end up performing worse than those who trust their training and allow their actions to flow naturally. The concept of flow, developed by psychologist Miley Csikszentmihalyi, describes a state where people perform at their best when they are not hyper-focused on controlling every detail. Instead, they surrender to the moment, acting with a sense of effortless concentration. This is why the best musicians, artists, and performers often say that they're most successful when they let go, rather than when they overthink. The paradox of control is also visible in relationships. Many people believe that the key to a strong relationship is ensuring that everything goes according to plan, controlling how their partner behaves, how they express love, and even how conflicts are resolved. But the more one partner tries to control the other, the more resistance they create. Micromanaging a relationship often leads to resentment and tension, pushing the other person away. Real connection comes not from controlling another person, but from trust, acceptance, and flexibility. This paradox extends into broader life situations as well. Consider anxiety, which is often fueled by a desire for control. People who experience chronic anxiety tend to fixate on all the things that could go wrong, trying to anticipate and prevent every possible negative outcome. But this constant mental effort rarely leads to more certainty. It often results in more anxiety. The more we try to control every aspect of our lives, the more we become overwhelmed by the sheer impossibility of doing so. Ironically, research in cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, suggests that true relief from anxiety comes not from trying to control everything, but from accepting uncertainty and learning to tolerate discomfort. Another compelling illustration of the paradox of control comes from leadership and management. Many leaders believe that to be effective, they must tightly control their employees, monitoring every action, making every decision, and ensuring that everything follows their vision exactly. But studies on workplace dynamics show that micromanagement tends to lower productivity, morale, and innovation. Employees perform better when they have autonomy and trust, rather than when they feel overly controlled. The best leaders are not the ones who try to dictate every outcome, but the ones who empower others and trust the process. Even in something as personal as happiness, the paradox of control is at play. People who try to meticulously control their emotions, forcing themselves to always be happy, never feel sad, or constantly maintain a positive mindset, often end up feeling worse. This is because emotions are not something we can simply command at will. True emotional well-being comes from allowing emotions to arise naturally, processing them without judgment, and understanding that we don't have to control everything we feel. So how do we work with the paradox of control? The key is learning to differentiate between what we can and cannot control. The Stoic philosophers, particularly Epictetus, emphasize this distinction, arguing that peace comes from focusing on what is within our power, our actions, choices, and attitudes, while letting go of attachment to things beyond our control, such as external events, other people's opinions, and unpredictable circumstances. A practical way to apply this mindset is through a framework often used in therapy, the circle of control. Imagine 3 concentric circles. The innermost circle represents what you can control: your decisions, your efforts, your mindset. The middle circle includes things you can influence but not fully control, like relationships, career opportunities, or health habits. The outermost circle consists of things you cannot control: weather, world events, or other people's behavior. The more energy you spend trying to control the outermost circle, the more frustrated and powerless you will feel. But if you focus on the inner circle, you'll find that control isn't about dominating life, but about mastering your own responses to it. This paradox doesn't mean we should give up on planning, ambition, or discipline. It simply means that real control comes not from trying to manipulate every variable, but from knowing when to act and when to let go. When we stop obsessing over controlling every detail, we actually gain more influence over our lives. The less we force, the more things fall into place. And in the end, it's often in surrendering control that we find the freedom and stability we were searching for all along. Paradox of time. Time is perhaps our most constant yet elusive resource, a paradox that has baffled philosophers, scientists, and everyday people alike. On one hand, time ticks uniformly on a clock, measured in seconds, minutes, on the hours. On the other, our internal experience of time is anything but constant. There is a fascinating contradiction at work. While the objective passage of time remains steady, our subjective experience of it can stretch, contract, and even seem to pause altogether. Consider the phenomenon known as chronostasis, often experienced as the stopped clock illusion. When you suddenly glance at a clock after your eyes perform a rapid movement, saccade, the first moment of perception seems to linger longer than it should. Research has shown that our brain suppresses visual input during these rapid eye movements, and then, to compensate for the gap in perception, fills in the missing time. The result is that the second hand of the clock appears to freeze for a moment before moving on, even though, in real time, nothing unusual has happened. This peculiar effect demonstrates how our internal timing mechanisms can be tricked by the way our brain processes visual information. Yet chronostasis is only one piece of the puzzle. In our everyday lives, many of us report that time seems to fly by as we grow older. A day that once felt endless in childhood now passes in the blink of an eye. This paradox, where objective time remains unchanged, yet our perception of it accelerates with age, has been linked to how our brain encodes memories. When every moment is new and richly detailed, as in childhood, our brains store an abundance of memories, which in turn makes the time period seem longer in hindsight. In contrast, adulthood is often characterized by routine, and as familiar experiences accumulate, fewer distinct memories are formed. As a result, large chunks of time feel compressed when we look back on them. Another dimension of the paradox of time arises from our constant battle between managing time and truly experiencing it. In our modern, hyper-connected world, we frequently try to schedule, plan, and control every minute of our day in an attempt to maximize productivity. Yet the more we attempt to pin down every moment, fitting meetings, deadlines, and social obligations into our calendars, the more we lose the spontaneous, lived experience of time. Many report that despite having more time, on paper, life feels rushed and fragmented. This may be because, by overstructuring our time, we inadvertently reduce our ability to savor and encode new experiences, which are essential for a rich, fulfilling sense of time passing. The subjective experience of time also shifts with our emotional state. In moments of high stress or fear, time can appear to slow down dramatically, a phenomenon that many describe during emergencies or even while engaging in thrilling activities like bungee jumping. Under such circumstances, our brain seems to heighten its resolution, processing more detailed information in what feels like an extended period. However, interestingly, this slowdown is often a retrospective effect. When we look back on an emotionally charged event, our memory of it seems to stretch out, even if during the event our actual moment-to-moment processing was unchanged. This interplay between emotion and time perception highlights the intricate way our feelings influence how we experience the passage of time. Scientific studies have delved into this complexity. For instance, Research on individuals coping with chronic pain or trauma indicates that these experiences can distort time perception, making minutes feel like hours. The brain's internal clock is not a fixed metronome, but a dynamic system that adapts to context, emotion, and attention. One study from Caltech even revealed that while our sensory systems process vast amounts of information at staggering speeds, our conscious thought operates at a comparatively glacial pace, about 10 bits per second. This speed limit on our cognitive processing not only underscores the disparity between the objective and subjective experiences of time, but also hints at why our brains are focused on the most of critical information while filtering out the rest. Furthermore, our cultural and societal constructs add another layer to this paradox. Different cultures experience time in various ways. What feels rushed in one society might feel leisurely in another. In some European cultures, for example, time is viewed as something to be savored through long lunches, siestas, and an emphasis on leisure, while in many Western business environments, time is equated with money and productivity. This cultural lens can significantly affect how individuals perceive their own passage of time, with the relentless pace of modern work often contributing to a sense of time poverty. Yet, paradoxically, when we attempt to slow down time, by, for example, seeking novelty, engaging in mindfulness, or stepping away from our routines, the experience of time can be transformed. Novel experiences force us to pay attention, to absorb details we might otherwise overlook. This increased attention leads to more detailed memory encoding, which, when recalled later, makes those moments seem to have lasted longer. Mindfulness practices, by anchoring us in the present, have been shown to counteract the feeling of time slipping away, providing a fuller, richer experience of each moment. This is why many people who meditate or take deliberate breaks from their busy schedules often report that time feels more expansive and satisfying. The paradox of time is not merely an abstract philosophical conundrum. It has practical implications for our mental health, productivity, and overall well-being. When we feel that time is speeding by uncontrollably, it can lead to stress, anxiety, and a sense of helplessness. On the other hand, when we manage to capture and savor our experiences, we create a subjective reality where time seems abundant and meaningful. It suggests that perhaps the key to a fulfilling life is not to fight against the relentless march of the clock, but to cultivate a deeper, more mindful engagement with the present. In reflecting on this paradox, it becomes clear that our experience of time is a delicate balance between structure and spontaneity, between objective measurement and subjective memory. Our internal clocks, influenced by physiological factors, emotional states, and cognitive limitations, remind us that time is as much about quality as it is about quantity. The ticking of a clock may be uniform, but the way we live those ticks can be full of variation, depth, and richness. Ultimately, the paradox of time invites us to reconsider how we relate to time itself. It challenges the notion that more precise scheduling and relentless productivity will lead to a better life. Instead, it suggests that by embracing the fluid, sometimes contradictory nature of time, and by prioritizing experiences that create lasting memories, we can transform our relationship with time from one of stress and scarcity into one of abundance and fulfillment. In doing so, we might just find that the true measure of our lives is not in the hours we count on a clock, but in the moments we truly live and remember. This paradox is a reminder that while we may never control time in the strictest sense, we have the power to shape our experience of it. By choosing to slow down, be present, and fill our days with meaning rather than mere schedules. Paradox of success. Success is typically celebrated as the pinnacle of achievement, a sign that hard work, talent, and perseverance have paid off. Yet, paradoxically, the very success we strive for can also become a prison, trapping us in patterns that limit further growth and fulfillment. In many cases, achieving success builds an intense confidence in our abilities, reinforcing a belief that what worked in the past will continue to work in the future. This self-assurance, while necessary for overcoming early challenges, can eventually blind us to emerging opportunities and changing conditions. Consider the case of a seasoned entrepreneur named Leonard. At 73, Leonard has built a thriving business over decades, earning accolades, wealth, and respect. Yet, when presented with excellent offers to sell his company, Leonard repeatedly pulls out of deals at the last minute. His hesitation isn't born from a lack of opportunity, but from an inner conflict. The success he's achieved has become so deeply intertwined with his identity that the thought of leaving his business behind is nothing short of terrifying. His relationships with his employees have come to define who he is, while his self-worth is measured almost exclusively by his role as a business owner. Over time, the confidence that once propelled him forward has turned into an impenetrable wall, preventing him from seeing that his methods and strategies, which once guaranteed success, may no longer serve him well in a rapidly changing environment. This is the paradox of success. It arises when the very factors that contribute to our achievements, such as high self-efficacy and a reliance on past victories, start to work against us. Psychological research has shown that as entrepreneurs and high performers experience repeated success, they develop a kind of tunnel vision. They become so confident in their own methods that they begin to discount external advice, ignore market signals, and overestimate their ability to replicate past triumphs. Studies indicate that increased self-efficacy is correlated with a higher propensity for risk-taking and an increased reliance on one's own judgment, often at the expense of collaborative insights or innovative ideas. For managers climbing the corporate ladder, the journey is different. They are regularly exposed to feedback from peers, superiors, and subordinates. A dynamic environment that forces them to adapt and refine their approaches continuously. In contrast, entrepreneurs like Leonard, who build businesses independently, often operate without such robust checks and balances. They create what can be thought of as a psychological castle, a fortress constructed around their established ways of doing things. Inside this castle, the strategies and values that once fueled their success become dogmatic. The organization is structured not to challenge the status quo, but to reinforce the owner's fixed perspective. Over time, this leads to a dangerous inertia and inability to adapt when external conditions change. The phenomenon is not limited to individual entrepreneurs. History is replete with examples of companies that soared to great heights only to crash under the weight of their own success. Xerox, for instance, once dominated the copier market with revolutionary technology and a well-defined strategic vision. Yet, as competitors entered the scene with more agile and cost-effective solutions, Xerox remained locked into its old paradigms. Their commitment to past strategies blinded them to new market realities, and what was once a winning formula turned into an albatross around their necks. Similarly, Firestone Tire and Rubber Company, which had built its reputation on reliable, high-quality products, found itself unable to adapt when new technologies emerged. Their long-standing success led them to invest heavily in existing processes and maintain relationships that no longer served the changing industry, eventually contributing to their downfall. These examples illustrate a common thread: success can breed overconfidence, complacency, and a narrowing of vision. When individuals or organizations focus solely on past achievements, they often neglect to question whether their strategies are still relevant. They become trapped in a cycle where every new challenge is met with the same old answers, even when those answers are no longer effective. This self-reinforcing cycle can lead to what some researchers refer to as active inertia, the phenomenon where the strategies that once delivered success now actively impede progress and innovation. The underlying psychological mechanisms are complex. Each success reinforces our belief in our own capabilities, which, in turn, increases our reliance on internal judgment rather than seeking external perspectives. This fusion of self-identity with our role identity creates blind spots. We begin to see our past successes as proof that our methods are infallible, making us resistant to change. Yet the environment is always evolving. Market dynamics shift, consumer preferences change, and new technologies emerge. When our internal compass becomes fixed, we lose the flexibility needed to navigate these changes. Research in positive psychology and behavioral economics supports this view. For instance, studies have found that when entrepreneurs overestimate their own abilities, they tend to take on excessive risks without adequate consideration of market feedback. This isn't merely a matter of reckless decision-making. It is a manifestation of a deeper psychological attachment to a successful self-image. The more we succeed, the more we feel that our identity is defined by that success, and the harder it becomes to imagine a life or business model that diverges from that identity. Moreover, the paradox of success has practical implications for business transitions and long-term sustainability. Many mid-market business owners, for example, struggle to exit their companies on their own terms because their identity is so tightly bound up with the success of their business. Research suggests that as many as 70% of these owners fail to exit gracefully, often because they are unwilling or unable to separate their self-worth from the business they built. This can lead to prolonged periods of stagnation where, despite continued operational success, the business fails to innovate or evolve, ultimately eroding its competitive advantage. Overcoming the paradox of success requires a deliberate and sometimes uncomfortable process of self-reflection and adaptation. It begins with increasing self-awareness, recognizing that the strategies and beliefs that once brought success may now be holding us back. For an entrepreneur like Leonard, this might mean confronting the fear of leaving behind a familiar identity and being willing to seek external perspectives. It may involve engaging in practices such as journaling, peer feedback, or even professional coaching to break down the psychological walls that have been built over years of triumph. Another critical strategy is to decouple self-worth from business outcomes. Instead of measuring success solely by external achievements, it can be liberating to adopt a growth mindset, one that values continuous learning and personal development over static benchmarks. By focusing on the process of growth rather than just the end results, one can open up to new possibilities and remain adaptable in the face of change. This might involve setting new types of goals that challenge not only the business, but also personal development in areas that have long been neglected, such as emotional intelligence, creativity, or interpersonal relationships. It is also essential to cultivate humility and the willingness to admit that, no matter how successful we have been, we are not infallible. The very traits that lead to early success, confidence, risk-taking, and a strong sense of self-reliance, must be balanced with the recognition that learning and change are lifelong processes. Embracing a mindset of continuous improvement can help dissolve the rigidity that comes from past successes. By actively seeking out diverse perspectives and remaining open to constructive criticism, we can avoid the pitfalls of overconfidence and ensure that our strategies remain aligned with the ever-changing environment. The paradox of success, therefore, is not an indictment of achievement itself. Rather, it is a reminder that success is dynamic, not static, and that the journey does not end once we reach a milestone. True success is not just about achieving goals, but about continuously evolving and adapting. When we allow our identity to become so entwined with our past victories, we risk creating an environment where change is not only unnecessary, but even undesirable. In contrast, those who remain open to change, who are willing to challenge their own assumptions and redefine what success means to them, are more likely to sustain long-term growth and fulfillment. Ultimately, the paradox of success challenges us to reconsider what it means to be truly successful. It asks us to look beyond the surface-level markers of achievement, wealth, status, and reputation, and to explore the deeper dimensions of personal growth, innovation, and self-fulfillment. By acknowledging that every success brings with it the seeds of potential stagnation, we can proactively work to ensure that our future successes are built on a foundation of continuous learning and adaptation, rather than on the inertia of past glories. Recognizing this paradox is the first step toward breaking free from the limitations it imposes. It requires us to embrace vulnerability, to admit that we might be holding on to outdated methods, and to be willing to reinvent ourselves, even after experiencing tremendous success. In doing so, we not only pave the way for further achievement, but also open up the possibility of a richer, more meaningful existence, one where success is measured not by the accumulation of accolades, but by the capacity to grow, adapt, and find fulfillment in every stage of our journey. Success, in its most sustainable form, is not the end of the road, but a continuous path of transformation. It is a process that demands we remain curious, humble, and open to change. Only by confronting the paradox of success can we truly harness the potential for future growth and create a legacy that endures well beyond our individual achievements. Paradox of failure. A failure is typically viewed as the ultimate defeat, a mark of personal or organizational weakness that must be avoided at all costs. Yet, paradoxically, failure often serves as the most powerful engine of growth, innovation, and self-improvement. It is as if failure, when embraced and understood, transforms from a dreaded setback into a necessary catalyst for future success. At first glance, failure appears to be the antithesis of achievement. We are conditioned to celebrate success with fanfare and accolades, while failure is met with criticism, shame, and even ostracism. This reaction is deeply ingrained in our culture and psychology. Many individuals, when faced with failure, experience a cascade of negative emotions: guilt, embarrassment, and fear of judgment. These responses can be so overwhelming that the mere anticipation of failure often leads to risk aversion and stagnation. Yet, when we peel back the layers, we discover that failure, rather than being a definitive end, is actually a process. One that, if approached with the right mindset, can reveal valuable lessons and pave the way for breakthrough innovations. Consider the story of Thomas Edison, who famously said, "I have not failed. I've just found 10,000 ways that won't work." Edison's relentless experimentation, punctuated by repeated failures, ultimately led to the invention of the light bulb. His example encapsulates the paradox: failure is not the opposite of success, but a vital component of the journey toward it. Edison's perspective reflects what researchers in psychology refer to as the growth mindset, a term popularized by Carol Dweck. Individuals with a growth mindset see failure not as a confirmation of their inadequacies, but as an opportunity to learn and improve. They understand that every unsuccessful attempt contains critical feedback, a clue about what doesn't work, that brings them closer to discovering what does work. This paradox is not limited to individual inventors or entrepreneurs. It pervades every level of human endeavor. In organizations, the fear of failure can be so potent that it stifles creativity and risk-taking. Companies may cling to familiar strategies that brought them early success, even when the market has shifted. This success trap results in what some researchers call active inertia. The very practices that once led to remarkable achievements eventually become rigid routines that hinder further progress. For example, a once dominant firm might ignore disruptive technologies because its leadership is so confident in its past formulas. As a consequence, these companies fail to adapt to new competitive landscapes, ultimately leading to their decline. Even if, on paper, they continue to perform well in the short term. Psychologically, the paradox of failure is rooted in the tension between our instinct to avoid pain and the potential benefits of learning through adversity. Failure forces us to confront our limitations and shortcomings, exposing gaps in our knowledge, skills, or strategies. This confrontation is often uncomfortable, eliciting a natural tendency to deny or ignore our failures. However, Research in resilience and post-traumatic growth has consistently shown that individuals who engage in honest reflection about their failures tend to develop greater self-awareness and adaptive capabilities. They learn to recalibrate their approaches, build resilience, and ultimately perform better in future endeavors. In other words, while failure is painful, it also provides the raw material for transformative change. If we can harness its lessons rather than be crushed by its weight. Yet the paradox of failure is multifaceted. On one hand, there is the risk that repeated failure, if internalized as a personal deficiency, can lead to a downward spiral of low self-esteem and demotivation. This is often seen in individuals with a fixed mindset, who interpret failure as an immutable signal of their lack of ability. Such individuals may become paralyzed by the fear of future failure, which discourages them from taking risks or pursuing challenging goals. On the other hand, failure has the potential to catalyze a reorientation of one's identity. When failure is viewed through a lens of possibility rather than defeat, it can prompt a reevaluation of priorities, strategies, and even core values. This transformative potential is evident in the lives of many entrepreneurs, artists, and leaders who have rebounded from significant setbacks only to emerge stronger and more innovative. In the realm of business, the paradox of failure is vividly illustrated by the phenomenon known as the Icarus paradox. Named after the Greek myth of Icarus, who flew too close to the sun and fell, the Icarus paradox describes how companies can implode after a period of unbridled success. When an organization achieves great success, it often develops a deep-seated confidence in its established practices. This confidence can lead to complacency and an over-reliance on what has worked in the past, making it difficult to pivot when new challenges arise. In some cases, the strategies and structures that once propelled the company to the top become the very reasons for its decline. Leaders who have experienced early success may become so wedded to their past achievements that they resist necessary change. Even as failure looms on the horizon, the paradox of failure also extends to the personal level. For many individuals, personal failure, whether in relationships, career pursuits, or creative endeavors, can be devastating. The societal stigma associated with failure often compounds the emotional pain, leading people to hide their mistakes rather than learning from them. This fear of failure can create a self-fulfilling prophecy, where the avoidance of risk results in missed opportunities for growth and innovation. Yet, those who dare to confront failure, to analyze and understand its causes, are often the ones who achieve remarkable breakthroughs later on. They develop a form of psychological immunity, a resilience that allows them to persist in the face of adversity. They learn to see failure as a temporary setback, a necessary detour on the path to success, rather than as a permanent mark on their character. Moreover, the paradox of failure challenges our conventional measures of achievement. In a culture that prizes success, the scars of failure are often seen as blemishes on an otherwise spotless record. However, a more nuanced view suggests that failure can, in fact, be a more accurate indicator of the risks taken and the potential for future success. When individuals and organizations are willing to take bold risks, failure becomes an integral part of the learning process. In this sense, failure is not only a byproduct of innovation, but also a necessary ingredient in the recipe for breakthrough performance. Entrepreneurs like J.K. Rowling have spoken openly about the hardships and failures they endured before achieving monumental success. Rowling's early rejections from publishers did not deter her. Rather, they fueled her determination to improve her craft and ultimately create a literary phenomenon that touched millions. Her journey underscores the idea that failure, when met with persistence and a willingness to learn, can lead to extraordinary outcomes. In organizational settings, fostering a culture that embraces failure can be transformative. Companies that encourage experimentation and view setbacks as learning opportunities are better positioned to innovate and adapt to changing markets. This approach contrasts sharply with environments where failure is harshly punished, leading to risk-averse behavior and stifled creativity. Research in organizational behavior indicates that when employees are not afraid to fail, they are more likely to propose creative ideas, challenge conventional wisdom, and engage in proactive problem-solving. Such organizations often implement fail-fast methodologies, not to celebrate failure for its own sake, but to quickly learn from missteps and iterate toward better solutions. The key is to balance accountability with an understanding that failure, in and of itself, is not the enemy but a signal that new approaches are needed. The paradox of failure also reveals a crucial insight about risk-taking. The fear of failure can lead individuals and organizations to adopt overly conservative strategies, avoiding risks that could potentially yield high rewards. This risk aversion, while protecting them from immediate setbacks, can ultimately inhibit long-term growth and innovation. In contrast, those who are willing to embrace the possibility of failure often achieve higher levels of success. They understand that taking risks is an inherent part of any significant endeavor, and that each failure provides data and insights that can be used to refine strategies and approaches. It is this willingness to risk failure and to learn from it that separates the innovators from those who merely maintain the status quo. However, there is a delicate balance to be struck. While embracing failure can lead to growth, repeated or unmitigated failures can also be demoralizing. The challenge lies in cultivating resilience, the ability to recover from setbacks without being overwhelmed by them. Psychological research has demonstrated that resilience is not an innate trait but a skill that can be developed through deliberate practice. Techniques such as reflective journaling, mindfulness, and seeking feedback from trusted mentors can help individuals process their failures constructively. When we view failure through the lens of a growth mindset, we begin to see that each setback is not a final verdict on our capabilities, but a stepping stone on the journey to mastery. For organizations, this means creating an environment where failure is not hidden or punished harshly, but analyzed and discussed openly. Companies that institutionalize mechanisms for learning from failure, such as after-action reviews, debriefings, and cross-functional collaboration, can turn failures into valuable organizational knowledge. This open approach not only fosters innovation, but also helps prevent the failure trap, where fear of failure leads to an unhealthy cycle of risk avoidance and stagnation. By normalizing failure as part of the creative and problem-solving process, organizations can encourage a culture of continuous improvement and adaptability. At the same time, the paradox of failure reminds us that not all failures are created equal. Some failures are simply the result of external factors beyond our control, while others are due to fundamental flaws in strategy or execution. The critical task is to differentiate between these types and to learn accordingly. Failure that results from a well-considered risk that did not pay off should be seen as an inevitable part of the innovation process. In contrast, failures that stem from neglecting to adapt to changing conditions or from internal complacency must be addressed through significant changes in approach and mindset. In conclusion, the paradox of failure challenges us to rethink our relationship with setbacks. While failure is often stigmatized as a sign of weakness or incompetence, it also holds the potential to be the most potent teacher of all. When approached with a growth mindset, failure can drive us to question our assumptions, refine our strategies, and ultimately achieve breakthroughs that would be impossible if we never risked falling short. Embracing failure requires courage, resilience, and a willingness to let go of the fear of making mistakes. It calls for a transformation in both individual and organizational cultures. A shift from a fixation on immediate success to a broader appreciation of the learning process. By redefining failure as a natural and informative component of success, we open ourselves to a more innovative and adaptable future. Instead of allowing the fear of failure to paralyze us, we can use it as a stepping stone, a signal that encourages deeper reflection and continuous improvement. In this way, the paradox of failure is not a barrier to achievement, but rather a critical ingredient in the long, often winding, journey toward lasting success. Paradox of vulnerability. Vulnerability is often painted as the very antithesis of strength, a trait to be hidden, a risk to be avoided at all costs. Yet, in a striking paradox, vulnerability is the wellspring of true strength, innovation, and connection. At its essence, vulnerability means daring to show our true selves, our uncertainties, our mistakes, and our imperfections, even when the prevailing cultural narrative urges us to maintain a facade of invulnerability. This willingness to expose our inner worlds is, paradoxically, what opens the door to profound personal growth and meaningful relationships. Imagine a leader who, instead of issuing commands from behind an impenetrable wall, chooses to share their struggles and uncertainties with their team. When such a leader admits that they do not have all the answers, they invite others to contribute, to collaborate, and to innovate without the fear of judgment. In this way, vulnerability transforms into a powerful connector, forging trust and deepening the bonds among team members. Research by Bren Brown has shown that embracing vulnerability is not a weakness, but a source of creative strength and resilience. Indeed, it is the birthplace of innovation and change. This paradox is also vividly apparent in our personal lives. Society often teaches us to armor ourselves against emotional exposure, to hide behind a mask of perfection in both professional and private realms. Yet when we suppress vulnerability, we inadvertently shut ourselves off from the very experiences that make us feel alive and connected. Relationships suffer when we are too guarded, creativity withers when we are too afraid to take risks. Conversely, when we allow ourselves to be truly seen, even in our moments of fear and doubt, we pave the way for authentic connections and a richer, more meaningful life. Psychologically, the tension arises from our instinct to avoid pain and rejection. The fear of vulnerability can be so overpowering that it leads many to adopt a fixed mindset, a belief that our abilities and worth are static and unchangeable. This mindset not only stifles creativity and risk-taking but also creates a barrier to learning from our failures. In contrast, a growth mindset, the belief that our talents can be developed through effort and experience, relies on vulnerability as its foundation. By accepting that failure and uncertainty are natural parts of any endeavor, we learn to see setbacks not as reflections of our inadequacy, but as stepping stones toward greater achievement. For instance, consider an artist who shares their unpolished work with a community of peers. Initially, the act of exposing raw creativity might feel terrifying, as the artist fears criticism or rejection. However, through honest feedback and collaborative dialogue, the artist refines their craft, gains new insights, and ultimately produces work that resonates more deeply with others. The artist's willingness to embrace vulnerability transforms potential failure into a catalyst for growth and innovation. On a broader scale, organizations that foster a culture of vulnerability often find that they become more adaptable and resilient. In companies where leaders encourage open discussion about mistakes and uncertainties, employees feel safer to experiment, take calculated risks, and challenge the status quo. This kind of environment not only drives innovation, but also builds collective strength. Practices such as reflective journaling, mindfulness meditation, and candid team debriefings have been shown to cultivate emotional openness and resilience, enabling both individuals and organizations to learn from setbacks and adapt in the face of change. Yet, the very idea of vulnerability remains counterintuitive in many competitive settings. In industries where being seen as infallible is equated with competence, admitting uncertainty can feel like an unacceptable risk. The paradox lies in the fact that while the instinct is to guard our weaknesses, doing so often leads to isolation and stagnation. Without vulnerability, we miss the opportunity to build trust, and to create the conditions necessary for collaborative success. Instead of deepening connections, the constant suppression of vulnerability can foster a climate of distrust and disconnection. The journey toward embracing vulnerability is not an easy one. It requires a conscious redefinition of what it means to be strong. Shifting from the outdated notion that strength is the absence of weakness to the more profound realization that true strength emerges when we dare to be imperfect. It calls for us to reframe our narrative, to view our failures and fears not as definitive shortcomings, but as valuable data points on the path to self-improvement. When we allow ourselves to be vulnerable, we invite not only empathy from others, but also a richer, more authentic engagement with life. In leadership, this transformation is particularly critical. Vulnerable leaders who share their own struggles create an atmosphere of psychological safety, where innovative ideas can flourish. They model the behavior of seeking feedback and admitting mistakes, which can galvanize an entire organization to become more agile and creative. In a rapidly changing world, such adaptability is essential for long-term success. The paradox of vulnerability, then, is a call to embrace our most authentic selves. It challenges us to confront our fears of exposure and to recognize that the willingness to be vulnerable is not a liability, but rather a profound source of strength and connection. By opening ourselves up, by allowing our imperfections to be seen, we break down the barriers that keep us isolated and disconnected. In doing so, we create a foundation for genuine growth, creativity, and lasting relationships. Ultimately, the paradox of vulnerability invites us to reimagine our definition of strength. True power lies not in concealing our flaws, but in the courage to reveal them, learn from them, and use them to fuel our continuous evolution. In a world that often values invulnerability, the brave act of embracing our true selves can be revolutionary. It is through vulnerability that we find the courage to innovate, the resilience to overcome setbacks, and the authenticity to connect deeply with others. And in that deep connection, we discover not only the essence of who we are, but also the potential for a more compassionate, creative, and fulfilling future. Paradox of abundance. Abundance is generally celebrated as a sign of prosperity, yet when we examine modern economies and societies, we encounter a paradox. Abundance can lead to both remarkable opportunity and profound problems. In this narrative, we explore the paradox of abundance, the counterintuitive phenomenon where having more of a resource or opportunity does not necessarily translate into a better quality of life for everyone, and in some cases even hampers growth, creativity, or social well-being. At the heart of the paradox is the idea that when resources, whether natural, informational, or technological, are abundant, they can overwhelm our ability to derive genuine value from them. Consider the example of information abundance in our digital age. With an endless stream of data, articles, and opinions available at our fingertips, we might expect that more information would lead to greater knowledge and wisdom. Yet many find themselves trapped in a cycle of superficial consumption. High-quality insights often get buried under a deluge of low-quality, sensational content. As David Perel has noted, the abundance of information makes it difficult for the average consumer to discern what is truly valuable, leaving most people overwhelmed and, paradoxically, less informed. In this way, abundance, rather than empowering us, can paralyze our decision-making and erode our well-being. This paradox extends beyond information to many domains. In consumer culture, we witness an abundance of goods and services. Supermarkets and online stores brim with choices. One might assume that with so many options, every consumer's needs can be met. However, this surfeit often leads to decision fatigue. With too many choices, consumers may experience regret over missed opportunities or feel anxious about making the wrong choice. This phenomenon, widely documented in psychology as the paradox of choice, illustrates how abundance can, in fact, decrease satisfaction and overall happiness. Instead of liberating us, An excess of options can create a burdensome sense of responsibility and even lead to decision paralysis. Abundance also has profound implications at the macroeconomic level. The concept of the resource curse, or the paradox of plenty, demonstrates that countries endowed with vast natural resources often experience poorer economic outcomes than those with more modest endowments. Take, for example, nations rich in oil or diamonds. While these resources have the potential to generate enormous wealth, they frequently come with hidden costs. Institutional corruption, economic mismanagement, and even conflict. When resource revenues become the dominant source of national income, governments may neglect investment in other crucial sectors, such as education, healthcare, or infrastructure. Over time, this imbalance hampers the overall development of the country, leading to lower long-term growth and, in some cases, increased inequality. The curse lies not in the resources themselves, but in the way they distort incentives and encourage rent-seeking behavior. This phenomenon shows that abundance, if not managed with robust institutions and diversified economic policies, can stifle innovation and development. Moreover, technological abundance introduces its own set of challenges. In recent decades, rapid advances in automation and artificial intelligence have promised to revolutionize industries and boost productivity. However, as automation becomes more prevalent, there is growing anxiety over job displacement and widening income inequality. When machines and algorithms take over routine tasks, the value of human labor, especially among lower-skilled workers, may diminish. The abundance of efficient, automated processes can lead to a reduction in employment opportunities, leaving many individuals without a stable source of income. This is the paradox of abundance in the labor market. While technological progress increases overall productivity and creates wealth, it simultaneously undermines the income, generating capacity of those who rely on manual or routine work, exacerbating social and economic disparities. Another dimension of the paradox is seen in the realm of personal well-being and psychology. When we live in a society of abundance, where there is never a shortage of goods, services, or opportunities, our expectations and desires can escalate to unsustainable levels. The pursuit of ever greater consumption and achievement creates a constant state of dissatisfaction. For many, the abundance of choices and the relentless pressure to succeed lead to stress, anxiety, and even depression. The feeling that there is always more to be had can prevent individuals from feeling content with what they have, trapping them in a perpetual cycle of striving that never results in lasting happiness. This insatiable drive can crowd out other, more fulfilling aspects of life, such as relationships, creativity, and community. In the face of these challenges, some thinkers argue that the key to resolving the paradox of abundance lies in redefining what we value. Instead of equating abundance with material wealth or endless choice, we might consider a shift towards simplicity, mindfulness, and cooperation. Philosophers like E.F. Schumacher have championed the idea that small is beautiful, that sustainable prosperity comes not from accumulation and excess, but from a mindful and moderate approach to life. By embracing simplicity and focusing on the quality of our interactions and the sustainability of our practices, we can mitigate the negative effects of abundance. For example, in the realm of information consumption, curated platforms and intentional reading practices can help individuals focus on high-quality, enriching content, rather than being swept up by the tidal wave of superficial media. This reorientation is not only a matter of personal lifestyle, but also a critical public policy challenge. As governments grapple with issues of resource management, job displacement due to automation, and environmental degradation, policies that emphasize long-term sustainability and equitable distribution become essential. Investing in education, healthcare, and infrastructure, rather than relying solely on resource rents or short-term technological gains, can create a more balanced and resilient economy. Furthermore, fostering institutions that promote transparency, accountability, and public participation is vital for ensuring that abundance leads to shared prosperity rather than concentrated wealth and corruption. At its core, the paradox of abundance reminds us that more is not always better. An excess of resources, choices, or technologies can lead to inefficiencies, inequities, and diminished quality of life. The challenge is to harness the benefits of abundance, such as innovation, increased productivity, and enhanced connectivity, while mitigating its downsides. This involves cultivating a culture of mindful consumption, investing in human capital, and building resilient institutions that can adapt to the ever-changing landscape of the modern world. Paradox of gratitude. Gratitude is almost universally celebrated as a powerful emotion that nurtures our well-being, deepens our relationships, and even improves our physical health. We are often encouraged to keep a gratitude journal, to express thanks daily, and to appreciate every blessing that comes our way. In doing so, gratitude is said to open our hearts and minds, creating a ripple effect of positivity that extends far beyond our individual lives. Yet, beneath its surface as an unequivocal good lies a paradox, a twist in the tale that suggests gratitude can, in some circumstances, become a barrier to growth and change. Imagine a person who, despite facing significant challenges at work or in a relationship, feels compelled to express gratitude for every small comfort and kindness. On one level, this gratitude acts as a protective buffer, softening the harshness of daily disappointments and creating a sense of inner peace. Research in positive psychology, such as the seminal studies by Robert Emmons and Michael McCullough, has shown that regular gratitude practice is linked with improved mental health, lower levels of stress, and even better sleep. However, there is a flip side. When gratitude becomes an almost automatic response, a reflex that prevents critical reflection, it can lead individuals to accept situations that are less than ideal. In this state, gratitude can dull our ability to see where change might be necessary. For instance, consider someone working in an environment where they are underappreciated or even exploited. They might be encouraged, by themselves or by external forces, to focus on the few positive moments or gestures from a supervisor, thus cultivating a habit of gratitude that masks systemic problems. Over time, this individual might begin to see these small kindnesses as sufficient compensation, thereby reducing their drive to seek better working conditions or advocate for fairness. In this way, gratitude, while soothing, may inadvertently encourage complacency. The very emotion that is meant to uplift can also serve to keep one tethered to an unsatisfactory status quo. Another layer of the paradox emerges in the realm of interpersonal relationships. Expressing gratitude is a cornerstone of healthy, supportive bonds. Yet there are instances where it can become a tool for control. When one partner constantly expects gratitude for every small favor or sacrifice, it can create a dynamic where the receiver of gratitude feels manipulated into a state of indebtedness. This indebtedness might manifest as an obligation to reciprocate in ways that are not necessarily in line with one's true desires or well-being. In extreme cases, the expectation of gratitude can even become a mechanism to silence criticism, as individuals may fear that expressing discontent would be seen as ungrateful or disrespectful. Thus, what is intended as a way to foster closeness can instead serve to maintain power imbalances and inhibit honest communication. The paradox of gratitude is also evident on a broader cultural level. In many societies, gratitude is taught from a young age as an almost sacrosanct virtue. Children are encouraged to say, "Thank you," for every gift, every meal, every act of kindness. While this can instill a sense of humility and community, it can also, if overemphasized, lead to a suppression of legitimate grievances. When gratitude becomes the expected response to every situation, no matter how challenging, it can discourage individuals from questioning injustices or striving for improvement. People might learn to focus solely on the positives, thereby losing the critical lens necessary to identify and address areas where change is needed. In this sense, Gratitude can become a kind of emotional sedative, numbing us to the realities that call for action. There is also the phenomenon of gratitude fatigue. When individuals are constantly bombarded with messages that they should be thankful for everything, even in the face of hardship, they can begin to experience a sense of emptiness or detachment. The genuine feeling of gratitude may be replaced by a hollow form of politeness or a sense of obligation that feels more burdensome than uplifting. This fatigue can lead to resentment, as the pressure to feel grateful, even when it does not naturally arise, undermines authenticity. The paradox here is that while gratitude is supposed to elevate our mood and foster well-being, an overemphasis on it can lead to emotional exhaustion and a decreased capacity for joy. Even within the realm of personal growth, gratitude can sometimes have a counterproductive effect. For many, the practice of gratitude is linked with a growth mindset, the belief that one can improve and evolve through effort and learning. Yet, if one becomes overly fixated on being grateful for current circumstances, there may be a diminished motivation to pursue further development. It is as if the act of feeling gratitude creates a self-satisfied bubble, where the desire to change or strive for something more is inadvertently muted. In such cases, gratitude might provide comfort, but it can also serve as a subtle excuse for inaction, a justification for remaining within familiar boundaries rather than venturing into new challenges. This paradox is not to say that gratitude is inherently negative or that it should be discarded. On the contrary, the benefits of cultivating gratitude are well documented and profound. The key lies in balance. Genuine gratitude involves acknowledging and appreciating what we have while also recognizing that there is room for growth and improvement. It requires an honest assessment of one's circumstances, a dual awareness of the blessings in life and the potential for betterment. In other words, gratitude should not be used as a way to simply placate discomfort or to mask systemic issues. It should be a springboard for constructive action. One practical approach to navigating the paradox is to practice reflective gratitude. Instead of merely listing the things for which we are thankful, we might also ask ourselves what changes could enhance our lives further. For example, after expressing gratitude for a supportive workplace, one might reflect on ways to advocate for even greater fairness or to contribute to creating an environment where everyone feels valued. This kind of reflective practice transforms gratitude from a passive emotion into an active agent for improvement. It allows us to celebrate the positives while still maintaining a critical awareness of areas that need attention. Another important element is the context in which gratitude is expressed. When gratitude is genuine and freely given, it has the power to strengthen relationships and foster mutual respect. However, when gratitude is expected or demanded, when it is used as a social currency to gain favor or avoid conflict, it can become a double-edged sword. In such contexts, gratitude loses its transformative power and instead reinforces existing hierarchies or power imbalances. It is the difference between feeling grateful because you genuinely appreciate a kind gesture and feeling forced to express gratitude because it is socially expected, even if the gesture does not warrant it. Ultimately, the paradox of gratitude challenges us to reconsider our approach to this most cherished of emotions. It calls on us to recognize that while gratitude can be a source of immense strength and connection, it must be tempered by a healthy dose of self-awareness and a commitment to continual improvement. The challenge is to cultivate gratitude in a way that acknowledges our blessings without becoming complacent, that appreciates what we have while still striving for what we can become. In doing so, we harness the true power of gratitude, not as a static state of contentment, but as a dynamic force for personal and social transformation. In a world overflowing with opportunities and resources, it is easy to assume that gratitude will automatically lead to happiness. Yet, as we have seen, there is a delicate balance to be maintained. Genuine gratitude can empower us, enrich our relationships, and inspire us to grow. But when gratitude becomes a shield against the pursuit of change or a tool for social control, it can diminish our capacity to challenge the status quo and drive meaningful progress. The paradox of gratitude, then, is a call to be mindful, not only of the blessings we receive, but also of the responsibilities that come with them. It reminds us that while it is important to be thankful, we must also remain vigilant, reflective, and open to the possibility of improvement. Only by embracing this duality can we transform gratitude from a simple feeling into a robust, evolving practice that fuels both contentment and progress. Paradox of listening. There's a common belief that listening is the foundation of effective communication. That to truly listen is to understand, to connect, and to heal. Yet when we examine the nature of listening, we encounter a paradox. The very act of listening, when taken to an extreme, can sometimes prevent us from fully engaging, acting, or even expressing our own ideas. In other words, while deep listening can foster empathy, trust, and insight, it can also lead to passivity or a kind of emotional over-involvement that blurs boundaries and undermines assertiveness. At its simplest, listening is more than just hearing words. It is an active, mindful process of understanding the speaker's perspective, emotions, and unspoken cues. Research in psychology, notably the work of Carl Rogers, has long demonstrated that empathic, active listening can create a safe space for honest dialogue. Rogers argued that when we truly listen without judgment, we not only validate others' feelings, but also open ourselves up to learning from them. This kind of listening has been shown to strengthen personal relationships, reduce conflicts, and even improve mental health. However, herein lies the paradox. If we are so focused on absorbing every nuance of what the other person is saying, we might inadvertently silence our own voice and needs. Imagine a workplace setting where a manager prides themselves on being an excellent listener. In meetings, they absorb every comment and try to understand every perspective. Yet, over time, this constant deference to others can create a dynamic where the manager's own ideas and leadership become muted. Team members might feel free to speak, but the manager's silence on key decisions may leave them without clear direction. In effect, the quality of listening has become so prized that it suppresses the necessary balance of speaking and decision-making. This is one side of the paradox. Effective listening demands openness and humility, yet too much openness can lead to indecision and a lack of assertiveness. In personal relationships, the paradox manifests in a similar fashion. Consider a friend who always listens, without interjecting. On the surface, this quality is admirable. It makes the other person feel valued and understood. Over time, however, the friend who listens might begin to withhold their own feelings or opinions out of a sense that their voice is less important, or because they fear disrupting the delicate balance of the conversation. The person being listened to, even if they are grateful, may come to expect this constant, almost self-sacrificing silence. In extreme cases, the listener's own needs and emotions become so subsumed by their commitment to hearing others that they lose sight of their own identity. What was once a tool for connection transforms into a barrier to self-expression and even personal growth. The paradox of listening also plays out in conflict resolution. In a heated argument, one party might adopt the strategy of listening intently, believing that by doing so they will better understand the other's grievances and pave the way for reconciliation. And indeed, many conflict resolution studies, like those emerging from the work of John Gottman, have found that active, empathetic listening can reduce defensiveness and foster mutual respect. Yet if one listens too much without offering one's own perspective, the other party may begin to interpret this silence as either acquiescence or lack of conviction. In such cases, the act of listening, intended to soothe the tensions, might be exploited by someone who takes advantage of that quiet compliance, thereby deepening an imbalance of power. There is also a cultural dimension to the paradox of listening. Many societies elevate listening as a moral virtue, Think of proverbs like, "Silence is golden," or the notion that the wise man listens more than he speaks. While these adages emphasize the value of understanding, they can also create social pressures to suppress dissenting opinions. When people are constantly told that the ideal behavior is to listen and be thankful for every insight offered by others, there may be little room left for critical dialogue or self-advocacy. This can be particularly dangerous in environments where open discussion is necessary for change, such as in workplaces suffering from systemic issues or in political settings where voices of dissent need to be heard. In such contexts, an overemphasis on listening might inadvertently stifle debate and protect the status quo, even when change is desperately needed. The paradox becomes even more complex when we consider the role of technology in modern communication. Digital platforms, with their endless streams of data and rapid feedback loops, have redefined what it means to listen. On social media, for example, we often listen by scrolling through feeds, absorbing countless opinions and perspectives in a matter of seconds. Yet this form of listening is superficial at best. It rarely leads to deep understanding or meaningful engagement. Instead, it can foster echo chambers and information overload, where the abundance of voices drowns out the nuances of genuine conversation. Thus, in the age of digital abundance, the paradox of listening is amplified. We have more opportunities to listen than ever before, but those opportunities often come at the expense of truly thoughtful, reflective engagement. So how do we resolve this paradox? The key lies in finding balance, a dynamic equilibrium between listening and speaking, between absorbing information and contributing our own ideas. True active listening is not a passive state, but an engaged process. It involves not only receiving information, but also reflecting on it, and then offering thoughtful responses. It is about being present in the conversation without losing sight of one's own thoughts and feelings. This balanced approach enables us to benefit from the insights of others, while also ensuring that our own perspectives are voiced and respected. One practical strategy is to practice reflective listening. After absorbing what the other person has said, take a moment to summarize or paraphrase it, and then share your own perspective. This method validates the speaker's experience while also integrating your insights into the conversation. Such techniques have been shown to improve communication in both personal and professional settings. Additionally, setting boundaries in conversations, knowing when to listen deeply and when to contribute assertively, can help prevent the loss of one's own voice. In leadership contexts, cultivating this balance is especially critical. Leaders who master the art of listening, while also confidently sharing their vision, are better equipped to inspire and guide their teams. They create environments where ideas flow freely in both directions, fostering innovation and trust. Conversely, leaders who listen without contributing risk being perceived as indecisive or disengaged, which can undermine their authority and the effectiveness of their leadership. Ultimately, the paradox of listening challenges us to rethink our understanding of communication. It reminds us that while listening is an essential ingredient for connection and understanding, it must be paired with thoughtful expression and active engagement. By embracing both sides of the coin, being open to others while also affirming our own voices, we can transform the act of listening into a powerful tool for personal growth, stronger relationships, and more effective leadership. The goal is not to listen more at all costs, but to listen better, actively, reflectively, and with the awareness that our own contributions are just as valuable as the voices we hear. Paradox of silence. A silence is often regarded as a sign of wisdom, calm, and introspection, a space where thoughts settle and true understanding can emerge. Yet there is a paradox in silence. It can be both a sanctuary and a barrier, a source of profound insight as well as a shroud that isolates us from the world. At its best, silence invites deep reflection and active listening, allowing us to process our experiences, connect with others on a meaningful level, and even spark creativity. But when silence becomes habitual or imposed, it can stifle communication, breed misunderstanding, and even conceal pain. Consider the moments when silence speaks louder than words. In a heated conversation, a pause, a deliberate, reflective silence, can allow emotions to cool and a better understanding to emerge. Research in communication studies has shown that well-timed silence can serve as an effective tool for de-escalation and can create space for empathy. For instance, when a friend is sharing a difficult experience, a compassionate silence can communicate acceptance and understanding far more powerfully than hurried responses or forced reassurances. This form of active silence is not emptiness, but rather a vibrant, intentional presence that honors the emotional truth of the moment. Yet, this same silence can become problematic when it evolves into avoidance. In some families or organizations, the silence is not a choice but an imposed condition, kind of emotional quarantine that prevents the expression of disagreement or the airing of grievances. When silence is used as a tool of control, it can suppress creativity and innovation. People may begin to internalize their frustrations, believing that if they remain silent, the problems will disappear. Over time, this quiet resignation can erode trust and lead to a culture where issues are never addressed, and the very potential for change is buried beneath layers of unspoken words. There is also a paradox in personal silence, the kind we use to listen to our inner voice. Many of us are taught that silence is golden, that by quieting the external noise we can better hear our own thoughts. In practice, intentional silence through meditation or reflection can indeed foster self-awareness and emotional resilience. Studies in mindfulness have repeatedly shown that periods of quiet introspection can lower stress levels, increase focus, and even improve overall mental health. But when this internal silence becomes all-consuming, it might lead to isolation. In the extreme, an over-reliance on our inner silence can create a bubble that disconnects us from the realities and experiences of others, leaving us adrift in our own thoughts without the grounding feedback of interpersonal dialogue. There is a cultural dimension to this paradox as well. Many societies honor silence as a virtue. Think of the proverbial silence is golden, or the reverence given to quiet contemplation in Eastern philosophies. In these contexts, silence is not merely the absence of sound, but a deliberate state of mind that facilitates balance and harmony. However, in environments where open communication is critical for progress, such as in democratic institutions or innovative workplaces, an overemphasis on silence can be counterproductive. When people are expected to remain silent, or when silence is valorized to the point where dissent is discouraged, it can prevent the vibrant exchange of ideas that fuels collective growth. Leadership provides a striking example of the paradox of silence. A leader who listens attentively and provides thoughtful pauses can inspire trust and encourage collaboration. Yet if that leader falls into a pattern of constant silence, avoiding difficult decisions or failing to articulate a clear vision, the team can become directionless. In such cases, silence that was once a strength becomes a weakness, a refusal to engage that hinders progress. Conversely, there are leaders who use strategic silence to allow others to speak up, revealing hidden talents or innovative ideas. The art of knowing when to speak and when to remain silent is a delicate balance, one that distinguishes effective leadership from mere passivity. The paradox of silence also extends into the realm of creativity. Many great artists and musicians have spoken about the role of silence in the creative process. The renowned composer John Cagefly created a piece composed entirely of silence, challenging our preconceptions about music and sound. Cage's work invites us to consider that silence, far from being void of meaning, can serve as a powerful counterpoint to noise, a canvas upon which the listener's imagination can paint its own narrative. Yet, if creativity is drowned out by constant activity and chatter, the opportunity for that transformative silence is lost. In our modern world, where digital communication bombards us with incessant notifications and background noise, carving out pockets of silence becomes increasingly challenging, but also ever more essential for creative thought. At the same time, silence can be a means of exclusion. In social settings, when someone is habitually silent, their silence might be misinterpreted as disinterest, apathy, or even disagreement. This misreading can lead to the person being overlooked or marginalized. On a larger scale, entire groups may be silenced, whether through censorship, social pressure, or self-censorship. The paradox here is that while silence can be a powerful tool for reflection and calm, it can also be weaponized to maintain power structures and suppress dissent. When voices are stifled, the opportunity for social progress is diminished, and injustice can persist unchallenged. So how do we navigate this paradox? The key lies in recognizing that silence is not inherently virtuous or harmful. It is the context and intention behind it that determine its impact. Active, intentional silence can be immensely valuable. It requires mindfulness to know when to listen deeply and when to speak up. This balanced approach, where we harness the benefits of silence without letting it become a barrier, can enrich our relationships, sharpen our insights, and empower us to engage fully with the world. One practical approach is to cultivate what might be called reflective silence. This involves setting aside time to be quiet and contemplate, without the pressure to fill every moment with conversation or noise. At the same time, in our interactions, we must learn to assert our own voice when needed, ensuring that our silence does not become a default that masks our true feelings or stifles innovation. For example, in a team meeting, a pause can be used effectively to allow ideas to surface, but it should be followed by clear communication of one's thoughts to drive the conversation forward. The paradox of silence, then, is a call for balance, a reminder that the most effective communication involves both listening and speaking. True wisdom is not found in perpetual quiet, nor in incessant noise, but in the thoughtful interplay between the two. As we become more aware of the dynamics of silence in our personal lives, our workplaces, and our cultures, we can begin to harness its power in a way that promotes understanding, fosters creativity, and supports healthy dialogue. In essence, silence is not a void to be feared or a luxury to be indulged in without thought. It is a dynamic, multifaceted tool, one that can connect us deeply with ourselves and others, yet also isolate us if not balanced by active expression. By embracing both the quiet and the spoken, by recognizing that sometimes what is unsaid is as important as what is said, we can transform silence into a bridge between thought and action, between introspection and expression. This is the true paradox of silencer. It holds the potential to be both the source of our greatest insights and the barrier to our fullest engagement. Recognizing and navigating this duality is a profound challenge and an opportunity to create richer, more authentic, and ultimately more effective communication in every sphere of life. Paradox of acceptance. Acceptance is often seen as a transformative act, a conscious decision to embrace the present moment with all its imperfections, joys, and sorrows. We are encouraged to accept our circumstances, our emotions, even our limitations, as a way to reduce suffering and foster inner peace. Yet herein lies a striking paradox. While acceptance can lead to greater resilience and clarity, too much acceptance can also morph into resignation, stalling our efforts to grow or change when change is needed. At its core, acceptance involves a deliberate letting go of resistance. It's a recognition that fighting against what is can be exhausting and counterproductive. In therapeutic settings, especially within acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT, practitioners learn to observe their thoughts and feelings without judgment. Research in this field shows that by accepting our inner experiences, rather than trying to suppress or change them, we can reduce stress, anxiety, and even depressive symptoms. In this light, acceptance acts as a powerful tool for psychological well-being. When we allow ourselves to experience pain, and disappointment without adding layers of self-criticism. We create the space for healing and creative problem-solving. However, the paradox of acceptance becomes apparent when we consider that complete acceptance can sometimes lead to complacency. Imagine a person who accepts every aspect of their life without question, be it a stagnating career, an unfulfilling relationship, or a habit that is holding them back. In such cases, acceptance might dull the inner drive for change. When we say, "It is what it is," we risk normalizing undesirable circumstances. In this sense, acceptance can become a comfortable prison, a way to avoid the discomfort of change, even if that change could lead to improvement. Thus, while acceptance helps us cope, it might also inadvertently undermine our motivation to challenge and improve the status quo. There's also a social dimension to this paradox. In many cultures, acceptance is championed as a virtue. We're taught to be grateful for what we have and to accept others as they are. This attitude can foster harmony, empathy, and mutual respect. Yet, when acceptance is extended unconditionally, it can also be misinterpreted as approval. For example, in a workplace where a leader insists on accepting the way things are, emphasizing patience and understanding, the underlying issues, such as inequality, inefficiency, or even mistreatment, may go unaddressed. People might feel that their valid concerns are being brushed aside under the guise of acceptance. In these cases, acceptance becomes a double-edged sword. It cultivates a calm environment, yet it can also mute the necessary call for change. The paradox is also evident on a personal level when it comes to self-acceptance. Embracing our strengths and weaknesses is often lauded as a key to personal growth. When we accept ourselves, our imperfections, our past mistakes, we can build a foundation of self-compassion that propels us forward. This self-acceptance is critical for developing a growth mindset, as it allows us to learn from our errors without being overwhelmed by self-criticism. Yet, there is a fine line between healthy self-acceptance and fatalism. If we become too comfortable with our current state, we might lose the impetus to push ourselves beyond our limits. For instance, someone who continually praises themselves for being good enough may miss opportunities for further learning and self-improvement. The challenge is to appreciate who we are while still holding the vision that we can evolve and become better, without falling into the trap of stagnation. In relationships, the act of accepting another person can deepen connection and trust. When we truly listen to a loved one and accept their feelings and experiences, we validate their identity and create a safe space for vulnerability. However, if acceptance is taken as unconditional tolerance, it may allow unhealthy behaviors to persist. Consider a scenario where a partner continually hurts the other, yet the injured party, out of a misplaced sense of acceptance, chooses not to set boundaries or demand change. In such a dynamic, acceptance, instead of being a catalyst for healing, becomes an enabler of ongoing harm. Thus, acceptance must be paired with discernment. It requires the wisdom to recognize when a situation is worth embracing and when it calls for constructive confrontation or change. There is a further layer to this paradox when we consider the role of acceptance in the context of loss or failure. Many philosophies and spiritual traditions encourage us to accept loss as an inevitable part of life. This kind of acceptance can be deeply liberating, allowing us to move forward without being anchored by regret or sorrow. Yet, if we become overly accepting of failure, we may inadvertently signal that it is acceptable to not strive for excellence or to settle for mediocrity. The key is to use acceptance as a springboard, a way to acknowledge reality without letting it define our future. By accepting our losses, we free up emotional energy that can be redirected into learning and growth, rather than being wasted on self-blame or despair. So how can we navigate the paradox of acceptance in a way that harnesses its benefits without succumbing to its potential pitfalls? One approach is to cultivate what might be called coactive acceptance. This means embracing reality as it is while simultaneously maintaining a commitment to growth and change. Active acceptance is not a passive resignation, but an engaged stance that acknowledges current limitations without letting them dictate our future. For example, a person might accept that they have struggled with public speaking, but rather than using that as an excuse for inaction, they can commit to taking steps, such as joining a speaking club or practicing in safe environments, to improve their skills. Another strategy is to practice reflective acceptance. This involves regularly checking in with oneself to evaluate whether the acceptance we are practicing is serving our well-being or simply reinforcing a status quo that might be improved. Journaling, meditation, or dialogue with a trusted friend or mentor can help reveal whether our acceptance is liberating or limiting us. In therapy, techniques like cognitive diffusion help people separate themselves from their negative thoughts and emotions, enabling them to accept these feelings without being overwhelmed by them. This balanced perspective encourages us to see acceptance not as a final destination, but as one part of a dynamic process of growth and self-discovery. The paradox of acceptance reminds us that while accepting life's realities is essential for peace of mind, it must be coupled with a vision for what can be changed. It is a call to be fully present in our experiences while remaining open to transformation. True acceptance involves a delicate balance between acknowledging what is and envisioning what could be, a balance that allows us to remain grounded yet ever-evolving. In our fast-paced world, where change is the only constant, the ability to accept without resigning ourselves to the present moment is a rare and valuable skill. It means recognizing the beauty in the now, while still daring to dream of a better future. Whether in our personal lives, our relationships, or our broader social systems, the paradox of acceptance challenges us to find that equilibrium, a state where we honor reality without being confined by it. Ultimately, the paradox of acceptance is a testament to the complexity of the human experience. It teaches us that acceptance is not the end of the road, but a stepping stone, starting point for further inquiry, growth, and meaningful change. By embracing the full spectrum of our experiences, from joy to sorrow, from triumph to failure, and accepting them with both compassion and a desire for improvement, we can transform acceptance from a passive state into an active, liberating force that propels us toward a richer, more fulfilled life. Paradox of freedom. Freedom is often celebrated as the ultimate gift, state of being in which every individual can pursue their own path, express their authentic self, and make choices without restraint. Yet there is a striking paradox hidden within freedom itself. The more unbounded our freedom appears, the heavier the burden of responsibility can become, sometimes even leading to anxiety, indecision, or a sense of isolation. In other words, absolute freedom, without any limitations or structure, can leave us feeling lost rather than liberated. At its core, freedom is the absence of external constraints. It promises a world where our potential is limitless, where we are not confined by the dictates of society, tradition, or authority. This notion is deeply embedded in the fabric of modern liberal democracies and is often portrayed as the highest ideal. But as we peel back the layers, we discover that true freedom is not merely about having endless choices. It is about navigating the responsibilities and consequences that come with those choices. Jean-Paul Sartre famously declared that man is condemned to be free, highlighting that the very condition of freedom brings with it the weight of constant decision-making and the anxiety of choice. When every possibility is open to us, the pressure to choose wisely can be paralyzing, and the fear of making the wrong decision can lead us to inaction or regret. This paradox is vividly illustrated in our everyday lives. In a society where freedom translates into an overwhelming array of options, be it in careers, consumer products, or lifestyle choices, the abundance of possibilities can lead to what psychologists call decision paralysis. Instead of feeling empowered by having so many options, many of us become overwhelmed, experiencing anxiety that hinders us from making even simple decisions. Research in behavioral psychology supports this idea. Studies show that when individuals are presented with too many options, they are less satisfied with their final choice and often regret their decision afterward. This is not because the options are inherently bad, but because the burden of choice makes us question whether we have truly done what is best for us. Moreover, freedom in its purest form often implies a lack of structure or external guidance. In political philosophy, this tension is encapsulated in Isaiah Berlin's distinction between negative and positive liberty. Negative liberty is the freedom from interference, the ability to live without external constraints, while positive liberty is to pursue one's goals and fulfill one's potential. The paradox arises when we have too much negative liberty without the supportive framework of positive liberty. In such a situation, individuals may feel isolated and burdened by the sheer responsibility of determining their own destiny, with no clear guidance on how to harness that freedom for personal or collective growth. Consider, for example, a society that prizes individual autonomy to the utmost degree. In such a society, people might be encouraged to question authority and chart their own course, but they might also find that the lack of a unifying structure leads to fragmentation and disconnection. Without common values, norms, or institutions to guide behavior, the exercise of freedom can devolve into an every person for themselves mentality. In this environment, the ideal of freedom may ironically result in social alienation, as individuals struggle to form meaningful connections or collaborate effectively with others. The freedom to act independently, when taken to an extreme, can undermine the very bonds of community that are necessary for a stable and thriving society. This paradox is not only a theoretical puzzle, it has practical implications in our personal lives, in our workplaces, and in the broader social order. In personal relationships, for instance, we often equate freedom with independence, valuing our ability to act autonomously. Yet, when we cling too tightly to the notion of personal freedom, we may inadvertently create distance between ourselves and those we care about. True intimacy requires vulnerability, a willingness to share not only our strengths, but also our weaknesses. If we are so obsessed with preserving our freedom that we avoid the compromises and concessions inherent in close relationships, we risk isolating ourselves emotionally. The challenge, then, is to strike a balance between maintaining our individuality and opening ourselves up to the interdependence that sustains genuine connection. In the workplace, the paradox of freedom can manifest as a conflict between autonomy and accountability. Many organizations champion the idea of empowering employees with freedom to innovate and take initiative. However, when employees are given absolute freedom without clear goals or structures, they may struggle with indecision, lack direction, or even become disengaged. Studies in organizational behavior have found that a certain degree of structure, clear expectations, well-defined roles, and constructive feedback is essential to convert the potential of freedom into productive outcomes. Without these boundaries, the very freedom intended to foster creativity and initiative can lead to chaos or inefficiency. Furthermore, the paradox of freedom plays out on the societal level in the context of governance and civic life. Democracies are built on the promise of individual freedom, yet they also require laws, institutions, and collective decision-making to function effectively. The freedom to express one's opinions and participate in public life is vital. But so is the freedom that comes from living in a society where rights are protected and responsibilities are shared. When political discourse becomes dominated by unchecked individualism, it can erode the common ground necessary for social cohesion and collective action. In such instances, the pursuit of individual freedom may come at the expense of the collective good, leading to polarization and fragmentation. So, how do we resolve this paradox? The key lies in understanding that freedom is not an absolute state, but a dynamic interplay between autonomy and structure, between self-determination and collective responsibility. True freedom is best understood as a balanced state, one that empowers us to make choices while also providing the framework within which those choices lead to meaningful outcomes. This balanced freedom is achieved through what might be called responsible freedom, a concept that recognizes the importance of personal liberty, but also the necessity of rules, norms, and mutual obligations. Practical strategies for achieving this balance include cultivating self-awareness and reflective practices that help us recognize when our pursuit of freedom is leading to isolation or indecision. For instance, mindfulness and meditation can help us appreciate the present moment while clarifying our goals for the future. In the workplace, establishing clear guidelines and expectations can transform raw freedom into a structured environment that encourages innovation without sacrificing accountability. And in our communities, fostering a culture that values both individual rights and collective responsibilities can create a social fabric that supports freedom without allowing it to devolve into disorder. The paradox of freedom ultimately teaches us that more is not always better. While the allure of unbounded freedom is powerful, without balance, it can lead to unintended consequences that stifle growth, connection, and well-being. It reminds us that the essence of freedom is not the absence of constraints, but the presence of meaningful choices within a supportive structure. In embracing this nuanced view, we learn that freedom is most potent when it is coupled with responsibility, self-reflection, and a commitment to the common good. In this way, the paradox of freedom challenges us to rethink our ideals. Not to reject freedom, but to refine our understanding of it. It calls on us to create environments, whether in our personal lives, our workplaces, or our societies, that honor individual autonomy while also nurturing the bonds of community and shared purpose. When we find that balance, freedom transforms from a source of anxiety and isolation into a dynamic, empowering force that truly enriches our lives. Paradox of innovation. Innovation is widely celebrated as the engine of progress. Process that transforms ideas into products, disrupts established markets, and propels society forward. Yet, beneath its brilliant promise lies a paradox. The very forces that drive innovation can also create barriers to further change and even foster stagnation. This is the paradox of innovation, a situation in which the constant push to break new ground ends up undermining an organization's ability to adapt, sometimes even leading to its own undoing. At the heart of innovation lies a tension between disruption and continuity. On one hand, innovation is about challenging the status quo. It requires risk, experimentation, and the willingness to abandon what has worked in the past. Think of companies like Kodak or Blockbuster, which once dominated their respective fields, but ultimately failed to adapt to new technologies and shifting consumer demands. Kodak, for example, was a pioneer in photography for decades. Its success in film processing and picture quality was unquestioned until the advent of digital photography. Despite having the early technology for digital cameras, Kodak's deep investment in its traditional film business made it reluctant to cannibalize its own profits. In this way, the very success that once fueled its growth became a prison, locking the company into a model that was rapidly becoming obsolete. This dilemma is captured perfectly in the concept known as the innovator's dilemma, a term coined by Clayton Christensen. Christensen's work explains how successful companies often fall victim to their own achievements. Their organizational structures, business models, and even cultures are optimized for efficiency and incremental improvement in the existing market. However, when a disruptive technology emerges, one that initially serves a niche market but later redefines an entire industry, these companies find themselves ill-equipped to respond. Their current customers, revenue streams, and internal processes, which were once assets, now become liabilities. In effect, the conditions that allowed them to succeed in the past hinder their ability to innovate for the future. At the same time, innovation carries with it a kind of creative chaos. The process of coming up with new ideas is inherently uncertain, unpredictable, and often messy. This creative turbulence is necessary for breakthroughs, but it can also lead to instability and inefficiency if not managed properly. Organizations may invest heavily in research and development and generate a plethora of ideas, only to find that too many projects compete for attention and resources. The abundance of innovation can cause decision paralysis, a situation where managers are so overwhelmed by possibilities that they struggle to choose which direction to pursue. In this context, the paradox of innovation is that an environment rich in ideas and potential can actually stifle effective decision-making and coherent strategy. Another dimension of this paradox is the conflict between incremental and radical innovation. Incremental innovation focuses on small, continuous improvements, while radical innovation seeks to completely upend the existing market with groundbreaking new technologies. Companies that rely solely on incremental innovation may miss out on radical breakthroughs that could transform their industry. However, pursuing radical innovation is risky and can disrupt current operations. Many organizations fall into a trap where their current success, built on incremental advances, creates a comfort zone that discourages the bold, disruptive changes necessary for long-term survival. This is why some firms, even as they boast high profit margins and market dominance, eventually find themselves overtaken by startups that embrace radical innovation. The paradox here is that success breeds a kind of complacency. When things are going well, there is little incentive to question established practices or invest in unproven ideas, even if such investment is crucial for future growth. Innovation also presents a paradox at the level of individual creativity. In many creative fields, the pressure to constantly produce novel ideas can be both a motivator and a source of stress. Artists, writers, and inventors often experience what might be called innovation burnout, a state where the expectation to continually generate new work leads to anxiety, self-doubt, and sometimes a creative block. The very act of innovation, which is supposed to be liberating, can sometimes feel like an unrelenting demand to reinvent oneself over and over again. Here, the paradox is that while creative freedom is celebrated, it can also impose a burden, leaving little room for relaxation or genuine self-expression. Over time, the pressure to innovate can erode the intrinsic joy of creation, transforming what was once a source of inspiration into a relentless, draining obligation. Moreover, the paradox of innovation is evident in the broader social and economic landscapes. In dynamic economies, freedom and support for entrepreneurship are often seen as key drivers of innovation. Yet, societies that celebrate absolute freedom can sometimes experience fragmentation and a lack of shared purpose. Without a common framework or vision, too much innovation can lead to disjointed efforts where individual breakthroughs do not translate into cohesive, systemic progress. For instance, regions known for their vibrant startup ecosystems, like Silicon Valley, are hubs of creative energy and technological breakthroughs. But this same environment can also produce fierce competition that sidelines collaborative efforts. The race to out-innovate one another sometimes leads companies to guard their ideas jealously, reducing opportunities for collective advancement. In such a scenario, the abundance of innovative energy paradoxically limits its own potential by fostering siloed approaches rather than synergistic ones. In addition, there is an inherent contradiction between the short-term pressures of the market and the long-term nature of true innovation. Investors and shareholders often demand quick returns, pushing companies to focus on projects with immediate payoffs. However, groundbreaking innovations typically require long periods of research, development, and iteration before they become profitable. This misalignment of expectations can stifle long-term innovation strategies, as companies might opt for incremental changes that satisfy short-term demands while neglecting the disruptive projects that could secure future success. The paradox here is that the competitive drive for rapid returns can actually undermine the deep, transformative innovation necessary for sustained growth. To navigate the paradox of innovation, organizations and individuals must find a delicate balance. One effective approach is to create separate structures for managing incremental and radical innovation. Some companies establish separate research units or incubators that operate independently of the main business. This allows them to pursue disruptive ideas without the constraints imposed by the established processes and expectations of the core business. In doing so, they can shield radical innovation from the inertia of past success while still leveraging the resources and expertise of the larger organization. Another strategy is to cultivate an organizational culture that values experimentation and learning over immediate success. Encouraging a mindset where failures are seen as necessary steps toward breakthrough insights can help mitigate the fear of risk. Companies like 3M and Google have famously institutionalized practices such as 120% time, where employees are given the freedom to work on projects outside their usual responsibilities. These practices not only foster creativity, but also help embed a culture of continuous improvement. The paradox of innovation can be softened when organizations recognize that the journey toward meaningful change is as important as the destination. On the individual level, embracing the paradox of innovation means accepting uncertainty and ambiguity as integral parts of the creative process. Rather than being paralyzed by the fear of failure, innovators can learn to view setbacks as valuable feedback. Mindfulness practices, reflective journaling, and constructive collaboration are all tools that can help individuals maintain balance. By acknowledging that not every idea will be a breakthrough, and that is perfectly acceptable, innovators can preserve their creative energy and avoid burnout. Ultimately, the paradox of innovation is a reminder that while progress demands change, not all change is inherently good. Innovation carries both tremendous potential and inherent risks. Its double-edged nature challenges us to harness its power responsibly, balancing the excitement of new ideas with the stability of proven practices. True innovation, then, is not simply about constant novelty. It is about the thoughtful integration of change with continuity, a dynamic equilibrium that drives sustainable progress. This paradox compels us to rethink our traditional notions of success and failure in innovation. It is a call to create environments, both organizational and personal, that are resilient, adaptive, and open to learning from both triumphs and setbacks. By embracing the inherent contradictions of innovation, we can transform potential pitfalls into stepping stones toward a richer, more adaptive, and ultimately more innovative future. Paradox of stability is something we instinctively crave. We look for systems, whether in our personal lives, our organizations, or even in society as a whole, that are steady, predictable, and secure. Yet, there is a paradox at work here. While stability gives us the comfort of order, too much of it can create a dangerous complacency. It can make us inflexible, slow to adapt, and even blind to emerging challenges. In a world that is ever changing, a system or organization that is too stable might find itself ill-equipped to handle sudden shifts or crises. Consider an organization that has enjoyed decades of success. Its systems are finely tuned, its routines well established, and its culture is one of consistency. Employees know exactly what is expected of them, and processes are so refined that there is little room for error. On the surface, this stability appears ideal. But what happens when the market changes? When disruptive technologies emerge, or when unexpected challenges arise? The very systems that provided stability can become rigid structures, resistant to change. The organization may struggle to innovate because its success depends on a formula that has worked in the past, not on a willingness to experiment or evolve. This paradox of stability is evident in many aspects of life. In politics, a stable government might maintain law and order and provide a predictable environment for economic growth. However, If the political system is too rigid, it can become resistant to reform and slow to respond to the needs of its citizens. Socially, stability might lead to social harmony and continuity, yet it can also foster a culture where challenging the status quo is discouraged, thereby stifling creativity and progress. On a personal level, we often strive for emotional and psychological stability. We value routines, traditions, and habits that give us a sense of security. But if we cling too tightly to what is familiar, we might miss out on opportunities for growth. The comfort of routine can sometimes act as a barrier to taking risks that could lead to new experiences or personal transformation. In essence, while stability can provide a foundation for well-being, it can also confine us within a narrow comfort zone, preventing us from exploring our full potential. The paradox becomes even more intriguing when we examine it from the perspective of innovation. Systems that are stable tend to resist change. They are built on established practices and proven methods. Yet, innovation requires disruption, a break from the norm. When an organization or society becomes too stable, it might find that its established methods no longer serve its evolving needs. This is why many once dominant companies, renowned for their stability and success, eventually falter when they face new technologies or shifts in consumer behavior. Their stability, which once provided the secure ground for growth, now becomes an impediment, a resistance to the necessary dynamism of change. The tension is also palpable in ecosystems. An environment that has reached a delicate equilibrium might seem robust and self-sustaining, yet it can be surprisingly vulnerable to disturbances. When conditions remain stable for too long, species may adapt to a narrow range of conditions, reducing the ecosystem's resilience. A slight change, a new invasive species, a shift in climate, can then have disproportionate effects, upsetting the balance that had been painstakingly maintained. So how do we reconcile this paradox? The key lies in understanding that stability and change are not mutually exclusive. They are interdependent elements of a dynamic system. True resilience, whether in organization, a society, or even within ourselves, comes from a balance between maintaining order and allowing for flexibility. It's about having a strong foundation that provides stability, while also cultivating the capacity to adapt and innovate when circumstances demand it. One practical approach is to build adaptive stability. This means designing systems that have stable core values and principles, yet are flexible enough to evolve in response to new challenges. In an organization, this might involve setting aside resources for research and development, encouraging creative problem solving, and fostering a culture where questioning the status quo is seen as a strength rather than a threat. In our personal lives, adaptive stability might mean maintaining healthy routines while also being open to new experiences and learning opportunities. In leadership, this balance is critical. Effective leaders provide the stability and direction that teams need, but they also remain open to change. They create environments where innovation is not feared but embraced, where established practices are regularly reviewed and updated, and where failure is seen as an opportunity to learn rather than a reason for stagnation. By doing so, they turn stability into a platform for continuous improvement rather than a static state that breeds complacency. The paradox of stability challenges us to appreciate the value of order and predictability while also recognizing the necessity of change. It reminds us that while too much stability can be suffocating, a complete absence of stability would be chaotic. The art of managing stability, then, is about finding that sweet spot where systems are resilient enough to provide a secure foundation, but flexible enough to respond to the inevitable waves of change. Ultimately, the paradox of stability is a call to embrace a dynamic perspective. It's an invitation to build systems, be they personal, organizational, or societal, that are not locked into a single state, but are capable of growth and evolution. By doing so, we ensure that our stability is not a barrier to progress, but a stepping stone toward a future that is both secure and vibrant. Paradox of selfishness. Selfishness is typically painted as a vice, a quality that isolates us, undermines trust, and leads to conflict. Yet when we look deeper, we encounter a striking paradox. Selfishness, when understood correctly, can be both destructive and beneficial. In many situations, individual self-interest drives innovation, resource allocation, and even cooperation. This paradox of selfishness challenges us to reconcile the idea that while looking out for oneself may seem inherently divisive, it can also create the very conditions for societal progress and mutual benefit. The notion of selfishness stems from the instinct to preserve one's own well-being. Evolutionarily, this drive has been essential for survival. Richard Dawkins, in his seminal work, The Selfish Gene, argues that genes behave in ways that seem selfish because doing so ensures their own replication. Yet, paradoxically, this selfish behavior at the genetic level often results in cooperation among individuals. For example, while an animal might be driven by the need to secure food and shelter for itself, those same instincts can lead to the formation of cooperative groups, where individuals share resources and work together for the common good. In this light, selfishness is not an absolute state but a driving force that, under the right conditions, can yield unexpected collective benefits. This idea resonates with the famous concept introduced by Adam Smith, the invisible hand. Smith posited that when each person pursues their own self-interest, they inadvertently contribute to an efficient allocation of resources that benefits society as a whole. When a baker bakes bread to earn a living, they are not primarily motivated by the desire to feed the community, yet, by pursuing their own economic interests, they provide a valuable service that nourishes others. Here lies the paradox: individual selfishness, channeled through competitive markets and guided by fair rules, can lead to outcomes that elevate the whole community. However, this beneficial outcome is not automatic. It requires that certain conditions be met, such as fair competition, clear property rights, and the absence of collusion. On the other hand, unchecked selfishness can lead to what we commonly see as a tragedy of the commons. When individuals act purely out of self-interest without any regard for the common good, they may overexploit shared resources, depleting them for everyone. Imagine a community grazing a common pasture. If every herder acts selfishly and adds more animals to maximize personal profit, the pasture will quickly be overgrazed, leaving little for anyone. In this situation, individual self-interest produces a collectively disastrous outcome. The key difference is whether there are mechanisms, be they social norms, regulatory institutions, or mutual agreements, that channel self-interest into sustainable practices. There is also a personal dimension to this paradox. Many of us have experienced the tension between the desire for personal success and the need for connection with others. On one level, we are driven by self-interest. We strive for personal goals, ambition, and success. Yet, we are also inherently social beings who thrive on connection, empathy, and cooperation. Extreme selfishness can alienate us from others, leading to isolation and loneliness. When we focus solely on our own needs, we may neglect the relationships that provide emotional support and enrich our lives. In contrast, when we balance self-interest with an awareness of others' needs, we often find that our individual success becomes intertwined with the well-being of our communities. This balance is evident in many successful organizations and economies. In a thriving market, for instance, competition forces companies to innovate and improve their products. Each firm, pursuing its own self-interest, is pushed to offer better quality or lower prices, which in turn benefits consumers. But if every company was solely focused on maximizing profits at any cost, by engaging in unethical practices or undermining trust, the entire market would collapse. The paradox of selfishness in business, therefore, is that while a degree of self-interest is necessary for progress and efficiency, an excess without ethical constraints can lead to market failures, corruption, and social unrest. Moreover, The paradox extends to political life. Leaders are often expected to be self-interested, to look after the interests of their own party or faction. Yet, if politicians become too focused on personal gain, they risk undermining democratic institutions and eroding public trust. When self-interest is balanced with accountability and the common good, political systems can function effectively. The challenge is creating structures and cultural norms that temper the darker aspects of selfishness, ensuring that individual ambitions do not come at the expense of collective welfare. The resolution of the paradox of selfishness, then, lies in finding a balance, a way to harness the drive for self-preservation and ambition while embedding it within a framework of mutual respect, cooperation, and ethical conduct. Society can do this by fostering environments where competition is fair, where individual rights are protected, and where the benefits of self-interest are shared broadly. Education plays a critical role here. When people are taught that true success is not just about personal gain, but also about contributing to the community, they learn to balance their ambitions with empathy and responsibility. On an individual level, this balance can be nurtured by cultivating self-awareness and empathy. Reflective practices such as mindfulness or journaling can help us understand our own desires and recognize when our actions might be harming others. By reflecting on our personal experiences, we can see that while our self-interest drives us to succeed, our connections with others often provide the support and inspiration needed to achieve even greater things. In essence, recognizing the interplay between selfishness and altruism can lead to richer, more fulfilling lives. Ultimately, the paradox of selfishness challenges us to reframe our understanding of what it means to act in our own self-interest. It is not a call to abandon ambition or to diminish personal goals, but rather an invitation to integrate them with the needs of our community. When self-interest is balanced by a commitment to ethical principles and mutual care, it can become a powerful force for innovation, growth, and social well-being. This nuanced view of selfishness recognizes that the desire to thrive is a fundamental part of human nature, but that true flourishing occurs when our personal ambitions are aligned with the collective good. In navigating this paradox, we come to appreciate that selfishness and altruism are not mutually exclusive, they are two sides of the same coin. By embracing a model where individual drive is tempered by collective responsibility, we can transform what appears to be a flaw into one of our greatest strengths. This is the paradox of selfishness. In seeking our own advancement, we may well be paving the way for a more innovative, compassionate, and prosperous society, provided we learn to balance our personal ambitions with the imperative to care for one another. Paradox of love. Love is celebrated as one of the most transformative forces in human life, a source of joy, connection, and meaning. Yet, as many who have experienced love know, it is also a realm of profound contradictions. The paradox of love lies in its ability to simultaneously uplift and wound, to bind us together even as it reveals our deepest vulnerabilities. At its essence, love is about connection, the desire to merge with another, to share experiences, dreams, and even fears. From early childhood to our adult lives, we are taught that love is the answer to loneliness, a balm for the soul that offers both comfort and growth. And indeed, when love is mutual and nurturing, it can inspire incredible creativity, courage, and resilience. Countless studies in positive psychology have documented how strong, supportive relationships correlate with improved mental and physical health, greater life satisfaction, and even increased longevity. In these relationships, love offers a safe haven, a space where we feel seen and valued. Yet, herein lies the paradox. The very act of loving deeply requires us to expose our innermost selves, to show our weaknesses, our fears, and our imperfections. In doing so, we risk being hurt, disappointed, or even betrayed. This vulnerability is not a flaw but an inherent aspect of love. To love is to open oneself up to the possibility of loss or rejection. As the existentialist philosopher Jean Paul Sartre famously noted, "Man is condemned to be free, and with that freedom comes the inevitable burden of risk." The more we allow ourselves to be vulnerable through love, the more we expose ourselves to the pain of heartbreak. Yet, without that same openness, our capacity to experience profound joy and connection is diminished. Consider the classic tale of star-crossed lovers like Romeo and Juliet, whose passion was as fiery as it was tragic. Their love, though beautiful and transcendent, was doomed by forces beyond their control. A reminder that love can elevate our lives while simultaneously subjecting us to suffering. This paradox is mirrored in everyday relationships. Many couples report that periods of conflict, when navigated with empathy and mutual understanding, often lead to deeper intimacy. The process of working through disagreements can foster an unexpected closeness, suggesting that even pain can serve as a catalyst for growth. Research on relationship dynamics has shown that couples who confront and resolve conflicts constructively tend to develop stronger, more resilient bonds over time. Yet love is also paradoxical in its dual nature of selflessness and self-interest. On one hand, genuine love involves putting the needs of another before one's own, demonstrating care, sacrifice, and generosity. On the other, it is also rooted in self-interest, the desire to feel needed, valued, and understood. In this way, acts of love often serve both the giver and the receiver. A parent, for example, may sacrifice personal comfort to nurture a child, while simultaneously deriving immense satisfaction and purpose from that act. This mutual benefit suggests that what might appear as selflessness is also, in a subtle way, an expression of self-love. The delicate interplay between caring for others and caring for oneself creates a balance that is essential for healthy relationships, even as it blurs the boundaries between altruism and egoism. Furthermore, love challenges our expectations of permanence. Many of us imagine love as a constant, unchanging state, an ever-burning flame that should remain intense over time. Yet, the evolution of love often follows a paradoxical trajectory. The initial phase of romantic love is typically marked by intense passion and excitement, a kind of emotional high that can feel overwhelming and all-consuming. Over time, this intensity often gives way to a more stable, companionate form of love characterized by deep trust, mutual respect, and shared values. While this shift may signal a maturation of the relationship, it can also evoke feelings of loss for those who equate true love with passion. The gradual fading of that initial spark can be misinterpreted as a decline in love rather than a natural evolution. A paradox in which the very change that sustains long-term connection is mistaken for the loss of love's essence. On a societal level, the paradox of love also plays out in the tension between individual autonomy and social expectations. Cultural narratives often portray love as the ultimate pursuit, yet they simultaneously prescribe rigid ideals about what love should look like. Ideal partners, perfect relationships, and unending passion. These expectations can place an enormous burden on individuals, leading them to strive for an unattainable perfection. When reality falls short of these ideals, disappointment and self-doubt can ensue, causing people to question their capacity to love or be loved. This cultural paradox, where the pursuit of idealized love creates conditions ripe for disillusionment, illustrates how love can both empower and constrain us. The paradox of love also manifests in the realm of personal growth. Many find that love has the power to transform, to inspire them to become better versions of themselves. Yet, in the process of loving, we may sometimes compromise aspects of our identity or neglect our own needs in favor of the relationship. The act of loving another deeply can lead to an unconscious merging of identities, where the boundaries between self and other blur. While this can result in profound intimacy, it can also lead to a loss of individuality, a situation where the very act of love, meant to enrich our lives, inadvertently diminishes our sense of self. Navigating the paradox of love requires a delicate balance. It calls for an acceptance of vulnerability without succumbing to fatalism. for embracing passion while nurturing stability, and for cultivating both selflessness and self-care. One way to manage this paradox is through reflective practices that encourage us to examine our own expectations of love. Mindfulness, journaling, or even open dialogue with partners can help us recognize when our ideals are unrealistic or when our desire to maintain the status quo is hindering personal growth. Moreover, fostering healthy communication in relationships is vital. It is important to express not only love and appreciation, but also concerns and boundaries. When both partners are willing to share their vulnerabilities, it creates a space where love can evolve without the pressure to conform to idealized images. Such honest exchanges enable partners to support each other's individuality while building a shared life together. A synthesis that honors the paradoxical nature of love. Ultimately, the paradox of love is a reminder that the deepest connections often arise from the tension between opposing forces. Love is as much about embracing imperfections as it is about celebrating virtues. It is about accepting that pain and joy, conflict and harmony are interwoven parts of the same tapestry. In acknowledging this complexity, we allow ourselves to experience love in its fullest, most transformative form, one that is not defined by static ideals, but by an ever-evolving journey of mutual discovery. The paradox of love, then, challenges us to rethink what it means to be truly in love. It invites us to appreciate that the most authentic expressions of love are those that acknowledge both the light and the shadow, the joy and the sorrow, the promise and the risk. By embracing the full spectrum of our emotional experiences, we not only open ourselves up to deeper intimacy and understanding, but also pave the way for growth and resilience. Love, in its paradoxical nature, is both our greatest source of strength and our most profound challenge, a force that, when navigated with awareness and balance, can lead us to a richer, more meaningful life. Paradox of identity. The paradox of identity centers on a fundamental tension. We strive to define ourselves as singular, coherent beings, yet our identities are in constant flux, shaped by our experiences, relationships, cultures, and even the roles we assume. On one level, identity appears fixed. We are often told, "Now who you are," as if there were a stable, unchanging core waiting to be discovered. Yet in reality, the more we try to pin down a clear definition of ourselves, the more we encounter contradictions. Our past, our social contexts, and our evolving aspirations continuously rewrite our sense of self, leaving us with an identity that's both fluid and elusive. This tension is evident in everyday life. Consider how our personal identities are formed as we grow up. We absorb the values and expectations of our families, communities, and cultures. We develop narratives about who we are: a student, a friend, a professional, and these labels give us comfort and a sense of belonging. However, these same labels can also become prisons. When we overly identify with a particular role, we risk losing the flexibility to adapt when our circumstances change. For example, someone who defines themselves solely as a high-powered executive might struggle to cope when faced with job loss or burnout, because that role has become the entirety of their self-concept. Here, the very stability we seek in our identities can limit our capacity for growth and transformation. At the same time, the quest for a stable identity is intertwined with the need for belonging. Social identity theory tells us that part of who we are is derived from the groups we belong to. Our nationality, ethnicity, religion, and even the subcultures we engage with. This duality creates a paradox. While we need the security of group identity to feel connected and valued, too rigid an adherence to group norms can stifle individuality and personal expression. We want to be both part of something larger and uniquely ourselves. Yet, the pressure to conform to collective identities often forces us to suppress the parts of us that don't fit neatly into the established mold, leading to internal conflicts and a sense of fragmentation. In our increasingly interconnected and digital world, the paradox of identity becomes even more pronounced. The internet exposes us to a multitude of voices, perspectives, and lifestyles, challenging our preconceived notions of who we are. Social media platforms, for instance, encourage us to curate idealized versions of ourselves. We compare, contrast, and sometimes even fragment our identities across different online communities. What begins as an effort to express our true selves can devolve into a performance, an endless juggling of various personas to gain validation and acceptance. In doing so, we may find that the search for authenticity in a sea of curated images only deepens our uncertainty about what our real self is. Moreover, the interplay between personal and professional identities presents its own set of challenges. Many people experience a disconnect between who they are at work and who they are in their private lives. The roles we adopt in our careers are often dictated by external expectations and market forces, leaving little room for the messy, evolving nature of our inner selves. Over time, the pressure to maintain a polished, consistent professional image can lead to a kind of identity dissonance, a split between the self we project and the self we feel inside. This internal rift can be both a source of stress and a catalyst for creative change, as we grapple with reconciling these disparate parts of our identity. So how do we navigate this paradox? One promising approach is to embrace what some scholars call adaptive identity. Instead of clinging to a fixed notion of self, adaptive identity encourages us to see our identity as a dynamic process, a story that evolves with time. Practices such as mindfulness, reflective journaling, and open dialogue with trusted friends or mentors can help us understand the shifting nature of our identity without feeling threatened by it. By accepting that our sense of self is not static, we open ourselves up to growth, allowing for the integration of new experiences and perspectives while still honoring the core values that matter most to us. This balanced approach enables us to retain the comfort of stability while remaining flexible enough to adapt to change. The paradox of identity, then, is not a flaw in our character but a natural, even necessary, aspect of being human. It reminds us that the journey towards self-understanding is as much about embracing uncertainty as it is about celebrating our strengths. When we learn to accept that our identities are multifaceted and ever-changing, we free ourselves from the pressure to conform to rigid definitions and allow our true selves to emerge, rich, complex, and beautifully contradictory. In essence, the paradox of identity challenges us to hold two seemingly opposing truths at once, that we are both constant and in flux, both uniquely individual and inherently connected to others. It is this interplay that fuels our capacity for creativity, resilience, and profound personal growth. By recognizing and embracing this paradox, we can transform the quest for identity from a source of anxiety into a powerful journey of self-discovery and continuous renewal. Paradox of security. Security is something we constantly strive for, whether it's personal safety, organizational protection, or national defense. We invest heavily in walls, cameras, protocols, and policies, believing that the more secure we are, the more we can shield ourselves from harm. Yet there's a paradox at the heart of security. The very measures we put in place to protect us can sometimes create vulnerabilities, limit our freedom, or even breed a false sense of invulnerability that ultimately leaves us exposed. Consider first the concept of the security dilemma in international relations. Nations build up their defenses not only to deter potential attackers, but also to signal strength to their rivals. However, this defensive posture can be misinterpreted. When one country ramps up its military capabilities, its neighbors may feel threatened, prompting them to arm themselves in turn. What began as a defensive measure can spiral into an arms race, where every nation's effort to secure itself ends up making the entire region more dangerous. In essence, the pursuit of security by one state can destabilize the system as a whole, creating an environment where mistrust and conflict become more likely. This phenomenon, long discussed by theorists like John Herz and further elaborated by many scholars, is a classic example of how the quest for security can paradoxically increase insecurity. At the organizational level, companies and institutions invest in cybersecurity, surveillance, and stringent internal controls to protect their assets and information. While these measures are critical, they can also lead to complacency. When a system is perceived as secure, decision makers may overestimate its resilience and become less vigilant about emerging threats. For example, a company that has invested heavily in advanced cybersecurity software might assume that it is impervious to cyber attacks, only to find that attackers have evolved their techniques to bypass these defenses. In this way, the illusion of security, fueled by past successes, can make organizations less prepared for novel, adaptive threats. The very protocols designed to protect an organization can become outdated, and without regular reassessment and innovation, the system can become brittle. On a personal level, the paradox of security emerges in how we manage our own risks. We often seek comfort in routines and the familiar, believing that a predictable environment shields us from harm. For instance, someone might lock their doors at night, install a security system, and avoid risky neighborhoods, all of which are sensible precautions. However, when the focus on physical security becomes all-consuming, it can limit our willingness to engage with the world and take healthy risks. Excessive concern for safety might lead a person to isolate themselves, missing out on experiences that contribute to personal growth and fulfillment. In other words, while security measures protect us from immediate dangers, they can also curtail our ability to embrace life's uncertainties and opportunities. This paradox also plays out in the realm of technology. In our digital age, cybersecurity is a top priority, and individuals and organizations alike invest in firewalls, encryption, and monitoring tools. Yet this constant vigilance can sometimes lead to a dangerous sense of complacency. For example, a user who relies heavily on antivirus software might neglect basic, safe browsing practices under the mistaken belief that technology alone will keep them safe. Similarly, companies might develop complex security infrastructures that, while robust on paper, are so intricate that they become difficult to manage and update. Attackers, ever adaptive, can exploit these complexities, finding gaps that a less secure, simpler system might have avoided. Thus, in the pursuit of maximizing security, we can inadvertently introduce new vulnerabilities. The paradox of security is further complicated by the social implications of defensive measures. In democratic societies, measures such as surveillance and data collection are often justified in the name of national security. Governments argue that monitoring communications or collecting personal data is essential to thwart terrorism and maintain public order. Yet, these practices can erode the very freedoms they are meant to protect. When citizens know they are being watched, self-expression may be stifled, and the open, free exchange of ideas can be compromised. This creates a chilling effect on society, where the fear of surveillance dampens creativity and civic engagement. The trade-off between security and freedom becomes starkly apparent as governments seek to secure their populations. They risk undermining the democratic values and liberties that form the foundation of a free society. Moreover, the drive for security can sometimes foster a false sense of certainty. When leaders and institutions present a facade of impenetrability, it can lead to overconfidence. This overconfidence might result in the neglect of emerging risks or the failure to prepare adequately for unforeseen events. For instance, financial institutions that believed their systems were secure before the global financial crisis were caught off guard by new forms of market volatility and risk. The illusion of complete security can lull individuals, organizations, and even entire nations into a dangerous state of inertia, where the lack of visible threats masks the underlying vulnerabilities that could lead to catastrophic failure. So, how can we navigate the paradox of security? The answer lies in embracing a more nuanced and dynamic approach to risk management. Rather than striving for an unattainable state of absolute security, we must recognize that uncertainty is an inherent part of life. both at the individual level and in larger systems. This means cultivating resilience and adaptability. In practice, this might involve regular reassessment of security measures, ongoing training, and fostering a culture where questioning and updating protocols is not seen as a sign of weakness, but as a necessary part of maintaining long-term security. On a personal level, it means balancing caution with openness, taking calculated risks that enrich our lives while still implementing reasonable safeguards. On the organizational and national levels, it involves designing security systems that are robust yet flexible, capable of evolving in response to new threats rather than becoming obsolete. Policies that encourage transparency, accountability, and continuous improvement can help mitigate the risks associated with overconfidence in our security measures. In the end, the paradox of security teaches us that while our desire for protection is both natural and necessary, it must be tempered with an awareness of the inherent trade-offs. Too much focus on shielding ourselves can lead to isolation, complacency, and even a reduction in the very freedoms we value. True security is not about creating a fortress that isolates us from the world. It is about building systems that are resilient, adaptable, and open to learning from the unexpected. It is a dynamic balance, a recognition that the goal is not to eliminate risk entirely, but to manage it in a way that preserves both safety and the richness of life. Paradox of experience. The paradox of experience is the intriguing phenomenon where the very things we seek to enrich our lives can, over time, lose their spark and meaning. Even as we accumulate more of them, we all crave memorable experiences, whether it's traveling to far-off lands, savoring a once-in-a-lifetime concert, or even simply sharing intimate moments with loved ones. Initially, these experiences can fill us with awe and joy, leaving a lasting imprint on our hearts and minds. Yet as we pursue more experiences, something unexpected happens. The intensity and novelty begin to fade. The first time we visit a breathtaking landscape, every detail feels extraordinary. The second time, familiarity creeps in, and the experience, while still pleasant, no longer carries the same emotional punch. In this way, the very act of repeatedly engaging in experiences can lead to what might be called the hedonic treadmill, where our baseline for excitement and satisfaction continually rises, leaving us in a perpetual quest for something new, even if that pursuit means we never truly savor any one moment. At its core, this paradox stems from our human nature. Research in psychology has long demonstrated that we tend to adapt to both positive and negative events, a process known as hedonic adaptation. Brickman and Campbell's seminal work in the 1970s revealed that after the initial emotional high of a major life event, our happiness tends to return to a relatively stable baseline. This means that while an extraordinary experience can offer a burst of joy, over time we get used to that elevated state, and its impact diminishes. In effect, the more we chase after intense experiences, the less impactful they become, as our minds quickly recalibrate what is considered normal. But consider the modern experience economy, where companies craft and market experiences as commodities. From immersive theme parks to luxury travel packages designed to evoke unforgettable moments, there is a booming industry built around the promise of unique experiences. Yet even in this realm, the paradox is evident. When experiences are packaged, commodified, and widely available, they often lose the mystery and spontaneity that once made them so special. Instead of being personal, transformative events, they can become predictable and even routine. For many, the quest to curate a life filled with Instagram-worthy moments can lead to a sense of pressure and, paradoxically, dissatisfaction. We begin to measure our lives not by genuine fulfillment, but by the accumulation of experiences that are, in many ways, increasingly standardized. This phenomenon isn't limited to consumer culture. It can be observed in personal growth as well. Think about the learning process. In our youth, new experiences, whether they be academic challenges, first jobs, or new friendships, are sources of excitement and self-discovery. Each new challenge seems to open up a world of possibilities. However, as we age and accumulate more experiences, the novelty wears off. We start to rely on our past experiences as a reference, which can make us resistant to change or new ideas. The richness of our past can, ironically, box us into a certain way of thinking, making it harder to embrace innovative approaches or fresh perspectives. Our accumulated experiences, meant to empower us, sometimes become the very shackles that limit our ability to adapt. Yet there is another side to this paradox. While repeated experiences may lose some of their initial luster, they can also deepen our understanding over time. With each repetition, subtle details that were once overlooked become apparent, and what initially seemed mundane can reveal layers of complexity. For instance, a musician might play the same piece countless times, and while the first performance is electrifying, subsequent renditions allow for technical refinement and deeper emotional expression. The key here is mindful engagement, approaching each experience with a fresh perspective rather than passively repeating the past. When we actively reflect on our experiences, we can find new meaning even in familiar settings. This reflective practice can help counterbalance the effects of hedonic adaptation, transforming routine into a source of continuous learning and growth. There's also a social dimension to the paradox of experience. In our relationships, the novelty of a new connection often carries an exhilarating intensity. But as bonds deepen and relationships become more established, that initial excitement may wane. Yet this does not mean that long-term relationships are any less valuable. Instead, they evolve into something more stable and profound. The challenge is to appreciate the transformation from passionate infatuation to enduring companionship without mourning the loss of initial intensity. In this sense, the paradox is that growth in relationships often comes with a trade-off, the fading of early euphoria in exchange for deeper intimacy and understanding. Ultimately, the paradox of experience is a reminder that while novelty can spark joy, lasting fulfillment often comes from embracing the ordinary with a mindful, reflective attitude. It challenges us to rethink our pursuit of ever new experiences, to question whether the relentless chase for the next thrill is truly the path to happiness. Instead, by finding ways to savor and re-engage with both new and familiar experiences, we can break free from the endless treadmill and cultivate a richer, more balanced life. Navigating this paradox requires balance, recognizing that while novelty is vital for stimulation and growth, the true value of an experience often lies in its integration into the broader narrative of our lives. Rather than constantly seeking out the next big thing, we can choose to be present, to reflect on our past experiences, and to appreciate how even the familiar can offer unexpected insights when viewed through a new lens. In doing so, we transform our relationship with experience from a cycle of fleeting highs to a journey of continuous personal evolution. Paradox of perfection. A perfection is widely regarded as an ideal, an unattainable state of flawlessness that promises to elevate our work, our relationships, and even our self-worth. Yet the pursuit of perfection often leads us into a paradox. The more we chase perfection, the more we expose ourselves to frustration, anxiety, and creative paralysis. In this narrative, we explore the paradox of perfection, examining how the relentless quest for flawlessness can simultaneously inspire greatness and hinder progress. At its core, perfectionism is driven by an intense desire to meet an often unrealistic standard. It's rooted in the fear of failure, a fear that anything less than perfect is unworthy of attention or praise. This mindset can drive individuals to set extraordinarily high standards, which when met, yield outstanding results. For instance, artists, writers, and musicians might spend countless hours refining their work, driven by the hope that every detail will contribute to a masterpiece. This dedication can lead to breakthroughs and innovations that push the boundaries of their fields. Yet, therein lies the paradox. The same standards that fuel excellence can become the source of our greatest limitations. The pursuit of perfection often results in endless revisions and procrastination. When every flaw is magnified and every detail scrutinized, the pressure to produce flawless work can be overwhelming. Instead of progressing, we become trapped in a cycle of self-doubt and inaction. The very effort meant to polish our work can render us incapable of finishing it at all. The phrase, "Done is better than perfect," encapsulates this truth. By striving for an ideal that is out of reach, we risk losing the chance to share our work with the world. This paradox extends beyond individual projects to affect our broader relationships and sense of self. In our personal lives, we may admire and even envy the qualities of perfection we see in others, yet internalize a constant feeling of inadequacy. We might insist that our worth is tied to our achievements, believing that if we are not perfect, we are unworthy. This mindset can lead to chronic dissatisfaction, as even small imperfections are magnified into evidence of our failure. In relationships, the expectation of perfection can create unrealistic demands, eroding the genuine, messy beauty of human connection. The vulnerability inherent in being imperfect, the ability to laugh, cry, and make mistakes, is what often makes us relatable and endearing. When we aim for an unattainable ideal, we risk suppressing that essential humanity. Interestingly, the paradox of perfection is not solely a personal struggle. It also has cultural and organizational dimensions. In many competitive industries, perfectionism is lauded as a marker of high standards and commitment. However, organizations that overly emphasize perfection may find that their relentless pursuit of flawless performance stifles innovation. When every mistake is punished and every misstep is scrutinized, employees may become risk-averse, reluctant to experiment or take bold steps that could lead to significant breakthroughs. Over time, this can lead to a culture of complacency and stagnation, where the fear of imperfection prevents the kind of creative thinking that drives progress. On the flip side, embracing imperfection can be liberating. Many creative thinkers and innovators have learned that true innovation often emerges from the willingness to take risks and learn from failure. Recognizing that perfection is an illusion can free us from the crippling pressure to get everything right on the first try. It allows us to view mistakes as opportunities for growth, rather than as reflections of our inherent inadequacy. This mindset, sometimes described as good enough, can foster resilience and adaptability, encouraging us to complete projects and move forward rather than getting stuck in endless revisions. The paradox of perfection also reveals itself in our evolving perception of our own work over time. A project that once seemed flawless in its infancy might, upon repeated exposure, reveal imperfections that we had previously overlooked. Our standards tend to rise as we accumulate experience, which can make our earlier successes seem less perfect in retrospect. This dynamic nature of our expectations suggests that perfection is not a fixed destination, but an ever-moving target. It's a reminder that the journey of creation is not measured by an absolute standard, but by the continuous process of learning, adapting, and growing. So how do we navigate this paradox? The key lies in striking a balance between striving for excellence and accepting the inherent imperfection of our human endeavors. One practical approach is to set actionable deadlines and commit to finishing projects, even if the results are not flawless. This can create a sense of momentum that propels us forward, rather than allowing us to be paralyzed by endless tweaking. It also helps to reframe mistakes as valuable data points, essential feedback that guides us toward improvement rather than as definitive judgments of our worth. Another effective strategy is reflective practice. Regularly stepping back to evaluate our work and our internal expectations can help us see the broader picture. Techniques like journaling or mindfulness can cultivate an awareness that our worth is not solely defined by our achievements. In this light, imperfection becomes not a flaw, but a fundamental aspect of our creativity and growth. Ultimately, The paradox of perfection challenges us to redefine our relationship with our work and ourselves. It invites us to celebrate the beauty in imperfection, to recognize that flaws are not failures, but rather integral components of the creative process. By accepting that perfection is not an endpoint, but a dynamic interplay of aspiration and reality, we can transform our approach to work, relationships, and personal growth. In doing so, we liberate ourselves from the tyranny of the unattainable ideal and open up a space where true innovation, joy, and connection can flourish.